I'd like to call this meeting to order and ask councillors to please turn their electronic devices to silent or vibrate mode and ensure they are properly signed into the system. So would you all sign in, please? And I'm going to call on Councillor Dart for our statement.
We begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is the home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living in Niagara is directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous people.
Thank you, Councillor Dart. Would members of council please rise for a moment of silence? Would you please remain standing for the Singing O Canada, and Councillor Greenwood will start us off.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all of us commend. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. Our first item is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any items to be added to the agenda? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. I'd like to add under delegations 9.1.3, Mr. Sam Oosterhoff, a member of Provincial Parliament. And actually, that's seconded by Councillor Insina.
You've heard the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Are there any changes to the order of items on the agenda? There not being any, I will ask for a mover and seconder to adopt the agenda. Thank you very much. A mover and seconder, Bilsma. And who am I going to say is going to be seconder there? Okay, and Senya. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none. Oh, Councillor Edgar, sorry, please.
I believe there's a report on childcare. Then I have none.
Oh, actually, Bill, he is correct. I'm sorry. It's on Bill's.
Okay.
Bill
Commissioner?
Yes. You are correct. Bill, the item related to Bill 66 and childcare. You are correct.
I have a conflict because my wife is Director of Children's Services for the Niagara region, so I will declare a conflict with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? There are no presentations, but there's now a delegations will be next. But before we move into delegations, I'll remind council that we have a very heavy agenda tonight. Speakers, you will have 10 minutes to speak. 9.1, first of all, is Bill 66, Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act, Planning Implications. Jeff Birch, Member of Provincial Parliament. The delegation admission is attached to this agenda as CLC 05-2019. I call Mr. Jeff Birch to the podium. Go ahead, MPP Birch.
Thank you, Chair and Council, for allowing me to be here this evening. It's refreshing to see Council that's open to delegations and community groups. And I'd like to begin by assuring this Council that it's not my intention to make this a habit. It's not my intention to use Council to oppose the government in any irregular or hyper-partisan way. I do understand that you must have a relationship with the province, and I hope it is a relationship where you can let them know when they do something good that you agree with, as well as when they propose legislation that you do not agree with. This is one of those extremely rare occasions when I feel I need to let you know in person that Bill 66, specifically Schedule 10, is a dangerous piece of legislation, and urge you to send a message to the provincial government, as many other municipalities have done or are in the midst of doing, that environmental protections are not red tape. The bill amends the Planning Act to allow municipalities, after receiving the minister's approval, to enact an open for business zoning bylaw for prescribed land use purpose. The draft regulatory proposal specifies that the project must be for a new major employment use, although the Act itself allows the government to prescribe any purpose. An open for business bylaw is exempt from the need to conform with a number of planning acts, very important environmental protections, the Great Lakes Protection Act, Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, growth plans under the Places to Grow Act, among others. And I will be focusing on the Greenbelt and, of course, Clean Water Act. Source protection plans to protect drinking water under the Clean Water Act, which was enacted as a direct response to 7 deaths at Walkerton in 2000, where thousands of people were poisoned by contaminated drinking water following the deregulation of water facilities by that government. The Greenbelt Plan, which protects farmland and natural heritage, and which the Premier vowed to keep intact in its entirety after being caught talking to developers and promising a, quote, big chunk of the Greenbelt for development. Something deeply concerning in Bill 66 is the ability for open for business bylaws to not conform with the source protection plans to protect drinking water under the Clean Water Act. This legislation was enacted, as I mentioned, in a direct response to the Walkerton tragedy in 2000. That event resulted in 2,321 cases of illness, over 750 emergency room visits, 65 hospital admissions, 27 cases of confirmed illness, and 7 deaths within a population of only 4,800. There are still some children today that are struggling with hypertension and kidney disease from this tragedy. Walkerton residents have come forward expressing concern over this bill. It's worth noting that this tragedy followed the deregulation, as I mentioned, of water facilities, and the economic impact of the Walkerton crisis was more than $64 million. The Golden Horseshoe, in speaking of the Greenbelt, is surrounded by a significant portion of the Greenbelt, and as it currently stands, the Greenbelt is one of the largest and most successful Greenbelts in the entire world. The Greenbelt provides regulatory protection from sprawl. Inside it is protected prime agricultural land, rural areas, heritage sites, and sensitive ecological and hydrological features. The Niagara Escarpment is part of the Greenbelt, and tourism associated with the escarpment contributes $100 million to local and regional economies. Those concerned with Greenbelt development in this bill outline that it will result in land speculation by developers, resulting in a loss of farmland and the disruption of farm communities. And I've recently met with the grape growers who are concerned about this legislation. It will undermine smart growth planning that's aimed at increasing density to facilitate affordable housing and transit access. Once you endanger the water table, or once we lose pieces of the greenbelt, we never get them back. How does Bill 66 affect municipalities? There are a couple of things I'd like to mention in the bill that have not been in the public eye as of yet. No public notice, consultation, or hearing is required prior to enacting the bylaw. Absolutely none. Secondly, the minister may revoke or modify the bylaw at any time before it comes into force. So the modification does not need to be approved by the municipality. And as we currently understand this bill, and this comes from lawyers, researchers, there's absolutely no criteria for these changes. So theoretically, a municipality could approve the bylaw for the purpose of building a hotel, and it could turn into a garbage dump. There do not seem to be any parameters. Ultimately, we are giving up the ability to determine what happens in our communities, and this is deeply concerning. Local government responses so far from a number of municipalities, the Waterloo staff report, which was developed by staff, not politicians, outlined that the proposed amendments to the Planning Act fail to, quote, fail to adequately protect human health and safety, in particular the safety of the region of Waterloo's drinking water resources. Following the staff report to the Planning and Works Committee meeting, the councillors voted to tell the province the region does not support the proposed amendments to the Planning Act. In the City of London, the staff report detailed similar reservations with the bill and added, quote, while the public consultation does add time to an approval process, public input often provides decision makers with valuable information for their consideration as a part of their deliberation on an application. And they're not interested in an act that does not provide for public consultation. The mayors of both Hamilton and Burlington have stated that they're not interested in this legislation if it means sacrificing land in the Greenbelt. And the mayor of Hamilton has indicated that this bill pits municipalities against each other. If, for example, one municipality turns down a development in the Greenbelt and another advocates for it. This bill is bad for municipalities and bad for constituents. As local representatives, we know that making development is one of the top priorities residents task us with, but it is not in our interest or ours to see open for business zoning put in place, and that is the Mayor of Oakville. The Environmental Defense Group, government data shows that there is more than enough land designated for development within existing cities and towns to accommodate the expected population growth until 2041. We see this move as another example of the Ontario government bowing to the pressure of sprawled developers. And our local business community, from our local Chamber of Commerce, Mishka Balsam, although the Chamber welcomes efforts to streamline business development, quote, it is important that we recognize the need to preserve lands for the environment, biodiversity, and even our simple enjoyment, and to ensure clean water supplies and clean air. And that's our local business community. Council, what I have presented here are facts. It is not fear-mongering, as some have suggested. It is not about partisanship or misinformation. What I have presented are statistics, legal opinions, research, staff reports from other municipalities, and historical fact. I ask you to have the courage to represent your constituents by communicating your concerns with this dangerous legislation to our provincial government. Once we leave our green spaces, they will be gone forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Are there any questions for the presenter? Seeing none, sorry, Councillor Senzik.
Thank you very much for your presentation. For your remarks and the concern about the Greenbelt, well-founded, because I think we would all agree that in Niagara, the Greenbelt has been an important part of preserving the agricultural land that surrounds us. And I think one of the intentions of Bill 66 was also for what would be job creation, not for residential development or commercial development, which would be big box stores. As a former councillor, we have to make comment on this as well. what are some of the areas in which you believe that we can streamline? Because I think you would agree that the process of the layers that are involved in development, especially when you look at the GE development that took place in Welland, the amount of regulatory burden that occurs when you try to build a project of that size. How can we help inform the provincial government that there are obstacles, whether it be the Ministry of the Environment, Ministry of Transportation, the Ministry of Labor, and then you layer in what would be the Escarpment Commission, the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, then the region, then the cities. You've been a former councillor. What would your recommendations be, or how could we provide gainful insight into try to reduce some of that regulatory burden that I think we all agree exists? So that's one area that I think I'd like to hear from you, as also the critic for municipal affairs.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And actually, the good planning principles and a way to cut red tape for business would be to focus developments on places where most planning acts suggest we should. And Welland does an excellent job of this, which is focusing on brownfields, focusing on areas within urban municipalities that should see development. That's what smart growth is. We should not be pitting jobs and development against our clean water and our green belt. Those environmental protections are there for a purpose. They're not red tape. I'm all for cutting red tape. I'm not for calling environmental protections red tape. Those are important protections that are there for future generations, but I completely agree with you that it's not good enough just to criticize. We should be pointing to areas where we can improve, and especially in inner cities with brownfields. I come from Meriton in your city, and we've done an excellent job in Meriton with using brownfields and developing those. Those are where we should concentrate, not greenfields and places where clean water is endangered.
Just as a follow-up to that, a number of mayors were meeting with Minister Clark, I think it was yesterday, and one of the direct comments from a mayor around the Horseshoe was looking to lift land out of the Greenbelt because it was land that was between two developed pieces of property, but it was zoned Greenbelt, so you couldn't lift it out. And Minister Clark said, stop. We are not talking about lifting anything out of the Greenbelt. So when it comes to, again, commenting on Bill 66, is it important for us to focus on how the region and the province and the municipalities better coordinate the planning principles that go into allowing for a development to take place that doesn't sacrifice our water source and our agricultural land?
Yeah, very much so. And two things. First of all, commenting on a tool is different than commenting on the people who are using that tool. So you don't need to be partisan or personal to criticize a bad policy tool. And this is a bad policy tool because it gives too much power to those in charge, whoever they may be, to make changes that will be harmful. That's the first thing. Secondly, I would say that any planning act that doesn't allow, as the City of Guelph said, that does not allow for public consultation is not a good planning tool. And so we need to make sure that it's not just about the minister and what the minister thinks, or even just what the business community thinks. It's how it affects everyone in the community, and making sure that we do the proper consultation and move forward in a responsible way.
So, Mr. Chair, after the delegation, there is a motion that I would hope to put on the floor that I think starts to capture what a lot of the discussion has taken place, because we do have a small period of time for commenting, and it's important for the region to comment on this one as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor DeZero?
Thank you very much for the delegation. We're hoping as well in Niagara-on-the-Lake to be able to put something forward to the Minister and the Premier with respect to this issue. As you know, Niagara-on-the-Lake has a lot of greenbelt. So the question I do have for you, it just actually struck me as you were talking about the whole impetus for this is to create opportunities for job creation and employment and things like that. And is there anywhere that you found in that bill definitions of employment in terms of time lengths and things, and I'll tell you why I asked the question, is one was arguing, I even forget who it was now, but somebody was arguing with me that Bill 66, a job could even mean building a house. So that would be a job creation. Now, that would, in my mind, that's a very short-term, 6-month job, but they kept arguing with me that no, if you're creating a job to build a house in the Greenbelt, you're still creating a job. Did you find any definitions in there of what the provincial government means with respect to employment?
There is a definition. I don't have it in front of me, but
Yeah.
it has to do with the application has to identify a certain number of jobs or employment opportunities to qualify. The troubling thing is, as I've mentioned, once that's done and the door is opened, the minister and the developer, without the participation of the municipality, can actually change that. And that's really the scary part. So yes, there is a definition, and I'd be happy to get you that information.
Sorry, I'll get it for sure. I
Yeah.
know from our staff, but I was just curious tonight because when you say they can change it, the whole impetus for this bill is to create jobs. I suspect, and I'm hoping it's long-term jobs, but I want to understand exactly, are you saying that once you've taken something out of the Greenbelt, that in fact a developer and the minister could turn around and say, oh, we're going to put housing there now? Is that what you're implying?
Two things. Yes, I am saying that.
Okay.
And the other thing is, I don't care how many jobs it is, you don't pit jobs against
Yeah.
the environment because it's not sustainable.
Great. Okay, thank you very much for your delegation.
Thank you.
Councillor Easton?
Much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Birch, for your delegation. I don't know whether you're familiar or not with the Town of Lincoln's value-added proposition in its official plan, and I'll speak to that later, Mr. Chairman, because we have quite a bit of experience with this a mechanism that was homegrown, if you will. My question, however, and I don't understand your relationship, the commenting relationship regarding water, because Walkerton was really a set of circumstances brought on by incompetence, lack of attention, failure to do due diligence, and we've done a lot of development in a lot of different areas in the town, and I'm not getting this connection with water safety at all. Maybe you could help me.
Yeah, so the bill speaks to a type of deregulation and a lack of consultation, which can result in, for example, developments too close to water tables and too close to sources of drinking water. That's what the city of Guelph is identifying as a concern, and the region of Waterloo. And so, one of the ways we ensure that that there is public safety is by making sure there is a public consultation process, which there is right now. If you want to make any changes, I believe the last government made about 17 different changes to the Greenbelt, but it went through a stringent public consultation process. It wasn't a minister and a developer saying we're going to do this, we're going to do it close to a water table or close to a facility. So those things are a matter of life and death. They have to go through proper planning processes, and that's why we have these regulations in effect. Some of the ones that I read are directly have to do with drinking water.
Okay, well, I'll certainly take your word for that, Mr. Birch. Mr. Chairman, I guess it sounds like the interpretation that you're bringing forward to us is one that really creates an open season set of circumstances where a municipality would actually be so irresponsible that they would read something that said you don't need to have consultation, and they wouldn't. Or even, Mr. Chairman, are you suggesting that possibly a community that may have gone through a very forward-thinking process and had all of their public consultations done up front so that the council would know exactly what the community wanted, maybe you could just give me a little bit more of an interpretation on something like that.
Yeah, sure. I would give a basically the same answer as I gave to Councillor Senzik, that there's a difference between the personalities and people involved in making the decisions and the tools that we make available to them. This is about the tools, the planning tools and policies that we make available to politicians. And so there could be some that have the wisdom not to use bad policy tools, but there is a danger that some will use them. And so when we make policies, we try and ensure that the policies guard us against bad decisions. We don't need policies if everyone makes good decisions.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Birch.
Councillor. Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. Thanks, Mr. Birch, for coming tonight. One of my questions is, do you think that the government has considered the kind of pressure that municipalities will be under with this kind of a bill? One of my fears is that if this is all utilized, that instead of kind of special circumstances and bringing, a business to fruition in a municipality, it'll become more of a common occurrence. So if that was to happen, no appeal processes, no public consultation, no public notice would be required. And like you said, depending on who's playing in that game, will really determine what happens with all those public opportunities.
Yeah.
So as the government kind of considered, I think municipalities will be under incredible pressure. We're already under pressure to bring jobs, bring work, do this, do that. I think once a door gets opened like this without checks and balances, that's certainly a concern to me. I think checks and balances are important. But do you think the government has considered all of that?
Well, I'm not sure if they have, but I know that they're going to, because we're going to go back to the legislature and it's going to second reading. And I hope that after that it will go to a committee where people outside of the, the focus of television cameras can make bills better. And I hope that they'll see that this is going to cause competition between municipalities, which I think is what you're referring to, where a municipality who is under financial stress will be, they'll feel that they need to consider these developments, because if they don't, it's going to happen anyway, and their neighbor may put in an application. So that's the kind of competitive, they're competing to build on the Greenbelt type of situation where we don't want to see, and we think that's something the government has not looked at adequately, and that's why we're bringing these concerns forward, so that they do, and we can, they have a majority. They're going to pass what they're going to pass, but hopefully they'll listen to municipalities, and they'll listen to the opposition, and they'll listen to others who try and make this bill better and close some of those loopholes so that we don't endanger public safety.
Thank you. If there are no other questioners, no other questions, thank you very much, Mr. Birch. On a similar subject, on the same subject, Brody Longmuir, resident, City of St. Catharines. Mr. Longmuir.
Well, thank you, Chair. I would like to begin my remarks this evening by thanking Regional Council for the opportunity to speak with you concerning the Ontario Government's Bill 66, entitled An Act to Restore Ontario's Competitiveness by Amending or Repealing Certain Acts. My name is Brody Longmuir, and I am a resident of St. Catharines. I'm a former employee of the Niagara Parks Commission, as well as the Grape Growers of Ontario. I ran for St. Catharines City Council in the past municipal election and am pursuing a master's in public policy at the University of Toronto. As has already been highlighted by MPP Birch, Bill 66 is extremely problematic for our region. Under this proposed legislation, lower-tier municipalities would be able to pass open for business bylaws to facilitate development. These bylaws would be able to be passed by a lower-tier municipal council and then sent to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing at Queen's Park to receive his approval. Upon receiving ministerial approval, the bylaw would be able to go into effect. According to Bill 66, there are only two criteria placed on open for business bylaws. The first, as was just mentioned, is ministerial approval, while the second would be the prescribed criteria, if any, that the minister chooses to impose. However, neither of these criteria have any built-in environmental or public health safeguards. This is concerning for multiple reasons. There is no requirement for local municipalities to circulate their plans to upper-tier municipalities. For example, none of Niagara's 12 municipalities would be required to consult with regional staff or coordinate open for business bylaws with regional plans, including the new official plan. This means that the region would not have a seat at the decision-making table when open for business bylaws were being considered. Another concern with Bill 66 is the lack of public consultation required to pass open for business bylaws. During this past municipal campaign, when I was out knocking on doors, I heard repeatedly from citizens the need for robust and well-advertised public consultations, especially on issues of development. Municipal elections in Niagara were dominated by concerns about developments in Niagara-on-the-Lake and in Niagara Falls, proposals for Livingston Avenue in Grimsby, as well as mismanagement at the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. Voters sent a clear message that residents in Niagara want strong democratic institutions that provide safeguards against unwanted and environmentally harmful development. However, Bill 66 would allow for the exact opposite. Under Bill 66, there is no requirement for any public consultations or prior notice of the municipality considering an open for business bylaw. Instead, the public would only need to be notified of an open for business bylaw within 30 days of the bylaw being passed by council. Under this proposed system, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing would be able to approve the bylaw, and the bylaw would be able to go into effect within 20 days. Therefore, as pointed out by regional staff at York Region, the bylaw could be in effect for 10 days before upper-tier municipalities and the general public need to be notified. Again, an open for business bylaw could be in effect for 10 full days before the general public and the region is notified that it even exists. What is even more concerning is that open for business bylaws can only be modified or revoked by the minister before coming into force. Therefore, not only is there no requirement to consult the public, but there is also no available recourse to the public. Schedule 10 of Bill 66 also allows for municipalities to circumvent significant environmental protection legislation. Open for business bylaws do not have to be in accordance with the 2015 Great Lakes Protection Act, the 2005 Places to Grow Act, the 2001 Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Act, the Lake Simcoe Protection Act, and most of all, the 2005 Greenbelt Act and 2006 Clean Water Act. This is especially significant for Niagara. Our region has, for many decades, been at the forefront of protecting our prime agricultural lands, wetlands, valleys, woodlands, and water sources. What differentiates Niagara from the rest of Ontario, and indeed the rest of our country, is the unique microclimate created by the Great Lakes, the escarpment, and our special soils. In fact, there are 27 more growing days below the escarpment than above or on the escarpment. As a result, the agricultural sector in Niagara is a critical one. Over the years, our tender fruit lands have been rapidly disappearing. For example, in St. Catharines, much of the tender fruit land that once existed has been lost to urban sprawl and development. While hindsight is always 20/20, and these lands have been permanently lost, the Niagara region should continue to be strong advocates for preserving the remaining tender fruit and agricultural lands in Niagara, as well as in the Greenbelt. Bill 66 would allow municipalities to circumvent the Greenbelt Act and promote development that would impact our agricultural sector and the Greenbelt. As the Preserving Agricultural Land Society mentioned in their letter to Regional Council dated January 15th, while, quote, while PALS knows Bill 66 refers to commercial development, history tells us that this will bring with it sewer, water, and road extensions, which in turn use good farmland and put pressure on nearby farmers and farming, end quote, and will embolden municipalities to, quote, press for urban boundary expansions, unquote, which is especially significant as the region moves toward its new official plan. Bill 66 also jeopardizes the access residents of Niagara have to clean drinking water. Under this proposed legislation, municipalities could circumvent the 2006 Clean Water Act to pass an open for business bylaw. This act, as spoken about previously, was infamously brought into effect following the Walkerton crisis in 2000, where out of a population of 5,000 at the time, 2,300 residents became ill and 7 died during a breakdown in the water system that led to Canada's worst ever E. coli outbreak. Bill 66 would allow municipalities to circumvent Section 39 of the Clean Water Act, which regulates the storage of manure, fuel, pesticides, and more. This, in combination with the ability of municipalities to circumvent source protection plans and regional plans, would place local water sources at significant risk. This is especially alarming considering the report presented to the region in February 2018 by NPCA Special Project Supervisor Jamie Campbell as part of the Drinking Water Source Protection Act study. Mr. Campbell found groundwater supplying the homes of 77,000 Niagara residents was highly vulnerable to contamination. He reported that the region has numerous hydrogeological sensitive areas with very little sediment to filter contaminants. As a result, Mr. Campbell said, quote, "What happens on the land very quickly gets into the aquifers," unquote. He reported that this has led to elevated risks of E. coli contamination in our region, as occurred in Walkerton in the year 2000. While I commend the provincial government for attempting to make Ontario more competitive and attractive to businesses, Bill 66 is wrong for Niagara. As a tourism destination with over 161,000 jobs depending on the Greenbelt, a unique and world-renowned agricultural sector, a population committed to environmental sustainability, and water sources that are vulnerable to pollution, the Niagara region needs to oppose this bill. For this reason, I have asked councillors to consider in their package a motion that Regional Council inform the Government of Ontario that it opposes Bill 66, which allows municipalities with permission of the Minister of Municipal Affairs to circumvent protective environmental water safety and planning legislation to rezone lands for commercial development without public consultation. I recognize that we need good jobs in Niagara. I am a young person, so many of my friends are fleeing this area because of the lack of job opportunities. I am all for bring jobs. I ran my entire municipal campaign on the premise of bring good jobs to the city of St. Catharines, but as well to the region. However, Bill 66 is the wrong way to do it. We've got to attract good jobs, but not at the expense of our own drinking water and our natural environment. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for the presenter? Councillor Bilsma.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My understanding of Bill 66 is essentially kind of an enactment of what exactly happened when we got the GE plant in Welland, or the CAMI plant in Ontario as well. It's an expediting process, so I understand that, and it's an opportunity to when large corporations or businesses see an opportunity, they don't want to wait 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years to enact. And so I see this as an opportunity to strike while business is good, while irons are hot, and get the much needed jobs that have been fleeing, as you said, because I campaign too on bringing jobs. And so I see this as nothing more than an opportunity for this to happen more often, which resulted in what I see the GE plant or the CAMI plant.
Right.
So maybe just make some comments on that.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I will say absolutely. I see the premise of this bill, and I definitely understand absolutely. I heard from businesses in Port Dalhousie, for example, Lock Street Brewing, talked about the fact that it took them a while to get the city and the region, as well as the other levels of government, to coordinate, to get licenses, that it was a long process, that they could have been open much sooner and hired more staff. So I'm absolutely in favor of attempting to make that process quicker, expediting that process, as well as making it more attractive to businesses to come to Niagara. I think the major concern here is twofold. First, of course, it's circumventing some of this legislation. I recognize that the government says they won't touch the Greenbelt. However, again, it does raise questions about why the Greenbelt Act would be something that needs to be included in this bill in the first place. The Clean Water Act would be the same thing. I agree with one of the councillors who earlier spoke about that no municipality would seek to have E. coli contamination unless it's very poor management. But the problem is, of course, that these safeguards are set in place for a reason, and that not all municipalities will use the opportunity to kind of be overzealous, but of course there is a possibility that some will. Just to speak very briefly to your specific point, the biggest concern I have, I think, as well, is also the fact that it's going through the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and so including the Canadian Environmental Law Association and some of the other regions, including York Region and the region of Waterloo, commented that that's also not really the correct minister for that to be going through. There is no possible way that the Minister of Housing would be able to, in time, have on-the-ground details on the impacts environmentally of some sort of development. So in reality, the other concern is the minister would be imposing criteria, but it's the Minister of Housing, it's not the Minister of the Environment. So there is not the ability for that minister, according to the reports from other regions, to actually get information in real time to make a good decision within the 20-day deadline. So I guess that my response to that would be, it is important to expedite the process, but certainly not at jeopardizing clean water or the green belt.
Thank you. Councillor Houston.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So if we were to not support the bill, is this a symbolic gesture?
I can respond to what I'm looking for, and I can say that's absolutely what I'm suggesting. I think that if the Ontario government wants to pass this bill, I think this bill is going to be passed. But I think what's important is the Niagara region has been committed for a very long time to building up the green belt and to securing, safe drinking water for our region. So I think it would be more of a symbolic gesture that, again, while we do support these job-creating initiatives, we don't think that compromising the green belt, our agricultural sector, and our clean water is something that will be attractive to employers. I don't think an employer, if we don't have clean drinking water, I don't think we're going to get a lot of employers wanting to bring jobs to this area. So that would be my response, is it's largely symbolic.
So maybe a question to the Commissioner, if we were to adopt a symbolic motion, not in favor of it, does it infringe on the municipalities and their ability to do anything?
Commissioner?
Thank you for the question, and through Chair Bradley. I think maybe my discussion or my input into this is a little bit early, because under correspondence you'll note that we've included the staff commentary that we proposed to the ministry relative to Bill 66. In terms of our commentary, we've stuck to sort of very technical matters. In terms of the symbolic message, I think maybe that has some value. I don't know to what extent actually it will have an impact on the government. That's really a political decision. I think more importantly, though, is from my vantage point, as I said in our correspondence, is that we rely on local municipalities to assess their own land use needs, to make decisions based on the best available information. In terms of public consultation, that's really a local purview. We've never really dictated to local municipalities the extent to which they should be reaching out to their constituents. It's up to them to satisfy themselves that they've done that and inform themselves when making decisions that affect land use in their community. So our comments, as I said, are strictly technical. If the council, in addition to this, wishes to make a more broad, politically motivated or special interest group motivated statement, you're free to do that.
So your concern is public consultations, the Greenbelt and clean water? Is that correct?
To some extent. So let me just clarify, because I know there were a few things said there that I just wanted to clear up. So what my motion is suggesting is not that we dictate to municipalities a certain threshold of what's acceptable public consultation, but what is being said by other regional staff in York, in Waterloo, is that this legislation will allow municipalities to circumvent the region. That regional plans do not have to be followed because of this open for business bylaw. Source protection plans put forward concerning the Niagara Peninsula, again, don't necessarily have to be followed by these open for business bylaws. So my motion that I've been trying to put together is basically just that symbolically, we want our municipalities to come to the region, to work with the region. There seems to be a lot of trust that municipalities will, and I think that's a good thing. I think most municipalities will continue to coordinate with the region. But I think that it's important that as a body, regional council emphasize to the municipalities, to the residents of Niagara, and to the provincial government that the Niagara region still has an important role to play in preserving our greenbelt and our clean drinking water.
I guess what I'm thinking is if the motion is a symbolic gesture to, be in support of public consultations, the Greenbelt and clean water, why don't we just have a motion that says that, right? Like, why don't we say, we want to promote public consultations, protect the Greenbelt, and preserve clean water as a motion, as opposed to
opposing Bill 66? Yes. I think that's very reasonable. I see a few councillors nod. I think that's very reasonable. The only reason that it's specific to Bill 66 is I think, as I said, again, the grape growers of Ontario, which I do not represent, by the way, but in conversations with the grape growers of Ontario, with the Preserving Agricultural Land Society, there is some concern that all of this legislation has been listed as something that can be circumvented by open for business bylaws. Obviously, there are important reasons that the Clean Water Act, I think we can all agree, the Clean Water Act, the Greenbelt Act exist. So I'm absolutely all, I understand it's just a symbolic motion. I'm absolutely all for that, but I do still think that mentioning Bill 66, it doesn't have to be in opposition, but it can say that despite Bill 66, we'd still like to see our municipalities consult the region and work within the guidelines presented by the provincial policy statement, the source protection plan, the Greenbelt Act, and all of those things. That I'm absolutely for. That would be, I understand absolutely what you're saying. It doesn't have to be so much opposed to Bill 66. It just has to be in light of Bill 66. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Furtick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to the presenter, I sort of have a problem with you saying that the municipalities can circumvent the region. And by that I'm saying that, for instance, let's say that this group from regional council said that we will not entertain any application from any planning department within the Niagara region that depletes the Greenbelt, because I'm all for the Greenbelt. I think it's a fabulous thing, because it's great for not only us today, but certainly our kids and our grandkids. But having said that, I have to agree with Councillor Houston in the sense that I think we can become the part of the driving force in saying to the municipalities, don't come to us if you're going to do anything with the Greenbelt.
Right.
I'm not quite convinced on the water, and I'm with Councillor Easton. I'm not quite understanding what that part of the act has to do with Bill 66. But anyway, having said that, we are the upper tier, and I do believe that our bylaws constitute what the municipalities have to abide by. So therefore, I would suggest that maybe council would go back to the municipalities and say to them, what exactly is your position on Bill 66? This is all brand new, and I don't know whether we got time to do that sort of thing. I think it's a done deal, but that's not, we're here to protect the Greenbelt in my version of it. Anyway, so I would prefer to go back to the municipality and say, listen, don't you dare come to me.
Right.
Because we're not going to entertain your planning. So therefore, if we don't entertain and approve the planning, it's not a done deal.
Right.
So I have exception to what you're saying, that the municipalities can circumvent the region.
Right.
Understand?
I do.
Okay.
Do you mind if I say?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Thank
so I appreciate that, and I think that is also a good solution presented by the councillor, that going back to the municipalities. I have had a challenge approaching the municipalities. As many of you know, there's been some cannabis legislation that's been taking up a lot of time, as well as responding to this. Some of the planners did not have their reports out as of today. The only thing I will say is that if you do look at other, again, I hate to flog the dead horse, but if you look at the region of Waterloo, for example, in their response that they sent to the provincial government, they said, quote, a requirement for public consultation and mandatory circulation to upper tier municipality, because they had significant concerns that there would not actually necessarily have to be any circulation to an upper tier municipality, and that because of that, if a municipality decided to go rogue, if you don't mind the saying, really there's nothing preventing it from not consulting the region and not involving the region, if that makes vague sense. It's just that the regional plan does not have to be considered. That's the big thing, because again, the bylaw would be approved before the region necessarily has to even have notice that the bylaw has been voted on.
Through the chair,
Yes, Councillor.
maybe I'm not quite understanding what you're saying, because the municipality's official plan has to come and be approved by the region.
Right.
So, again, we're the signing authority for the municipality.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that the municipality wouldn't take an opportunity to try and go into the Greenbelt, but I think the fear is you come to the region, we're not going to accept it.
Right. No, and
that's the way I would play it anyway.
No, and my only response to that, I absolutely am in 100% agreement with you, that I think any municipality that attempts to venture into the Greenbelt knows that's dangerous territory, and that the region would be on them very quickly. My only response again is, remember what I said in my original comments, that in all technicality, the bylaw can be enforced for 10 days before the region even has to find out that the bylaw was passed. That's the big concern. And again, the concern about the source protection plans and things like that. But that was the big concern. But I agree with you that I don't think municipalities would venture into that for long without the region, hopefully without the region stepping in. But that's why I'd like to, again, back to the other councillor's point, comment that I'd like the municipalities and the residents of Niagara to see a motion from regional council saying, we support the Greenbelt, we support public consultations, we support municipalities coming to the region and consulting with us first. Bill 66 may give you powers to do otherwise, but we'd still like to operate under the other system.
Thank you. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the presenters indicated that there's a package with his proposed motion. I don't seem to have it, and I'm not sure where that would be or what he's referring to. So through you, could I ask the presenter where that package is?
I'm going to defer to the clerk on this one.
Sorry, we did receive it late, but we'll attach it to the minutes.
There's three pages, but there's no motion or anything here. Okay. Sorry, we don't have it back.
No, that's all right. I don't mind, again, reading the motion that I put forward. The only reason I think there might have been a confusion on the deadline is that that I know I had originally indicated that there would be a PowerPoint presentation. So the clerk had mentioned to get the materials to her by 9 a.m. this morning. But I changed that. So I think the problem was, I understand there's a 48-hour or a 24-hour in advance for submission for materials. Again, I don't mind reading the motion. I apologize for the confusion there. But it's the materials I technically submitted at 9 this morning, but I understand because they weren't materials for the presentation, that they weren't necessarily given to you, I think.
Well, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yes, sir.
I would suggest that we should receive that after, and we certainly can defer any kind of motion bringing forward related to this till our next meeting. Perhaps go to planning and let us have all the information forward at that time. We've got a lot on the agenda today, and we have another presenter on this. He may have a different motion for us to sever. So if that would be okay, I would prefer to not have to have it read out and that we see it in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Bellows.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. I too share the same concerns as Mayor Easton about the clean drinking water. I also totally agree with Councillor Rigby. You know, we take a lot of time to look through things. It could be your opinion, like you said, that you canvass St. Catharines, but you're also a part of another party, you know, helping, you know, as an aid in that sense. So I know you've got a lot of information, and so I commend you on your presentation. But I also think that I don't really believe there's a distrust amongst the municipalities to come to the region. I think all 31 of us, you know, took that oath that we want to work for the citizens of Niagara. And I think that, you know, we owe it to each other to take the time to read this motion and perhaps come back at the next meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Dart.
Can I ask Commissioner Mustachi, can you give us a view about the safe water issue?
Mr. Chair, would that not be a question that's asked when we get to the completed presentations? So that
yes,
our presenters could probably get out of here.
I think that's
Hold it till later? Okay.
If we can, Councillor Dart, when we have all three people have made the presentation, then I think that's a reasonable question to ask. Any further questions of the presenter? If not, thank you, Mr. Longmire. And our next presenter, because of it's on the same topic, this is an appropriate time to have MPP Sam Oosterhoff speak as one of the presenters. Mr. Oosterhoff.
Chair Bradley, councillors, good evening. Happy New Year, and congratulations on your election. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to come and address this council, and I want to thank you for welcoming me at such late notice, no less, to your House of Democracy. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to be here and speak about an issue that is, of course, very important and one that clearly is taking up a fair amount of people's thought process around issues of clean water, of the green belt, and of course bringing jobs to Niagara. I want to start by saying that leading up to Bill 66, the Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Bill, we reached out through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and spoke with hundreds of different municipalities as well as many other stakeholders about some of the barriers that really have created problems to bringing jobs here to the province of Ontario. And as you may know, we face a little bit of a fiscal situation right now in the province of Ontario, and we're working very hard to address that. But we also were elected on a clear commitment to bring jobs into the province of Ontario. And throughout the planning process of the Competitiveness Act, we heard from municipalities and we heard from stakeholders that one of the key pieces holding back Ontario's competitiveness was the time frame that it takes for job creators to come to Ontario and set up. And what we heard from municipalities was that the province had not given them the tools that they needed. So let me be very, very clear. We are not touching the Greenbelt. Bill 66 will not impact the Greenbelt. It does not touch the Clean Water Act. The mayor of Walkerton himself came and said he would be the first person to speak out if there was any piece of this legislation that included touching anything to do with water safety. And he was very clear that he believes this is an act that's important to creating a competitive advantage for Ontario. What we've done in Bill 66 is brought forward a package of regulatory and legislative changes that target unnecessary, duplicative, or outdated regulations that do nothing to protect the environment, health, or safety. Businesses looking for sites and meeting certain prescribed provincial guidelines could qualify for the streamlined approvals with municipal support. And I want to be very clear and stress that this does not give the government or the Minister of Municipal Affairs any additional powers to those that exist, than those that exist already. What it does do is it gives each and every one of you, or those of you at the lower tiers, in the lower municipalities, the ability to have a portal where you can come to the Minister of Municipal Affairs in a clean process and apply for a 1-year guaranteed streamlined process to help job creators navigate the complex system of development approvals that currently exist. And we've all heard the stories about job creators that came looking, perhaps from out of country or perhaps from other parts of the country, that wanted to come and do business. Mayor Campion, you know full well that the minister's zoning order is a necessary tool in the minister's toolkit to make sure that we're able to open these important job sites. And we've seen other parts and places across this province where it was necessary. What this bill does is it creates an application process and allows municipalities to call on the provincial government. But we have been clear that we are going to protect the Greenbelt and will not support proposals in contrast with that commitment. Let me repeat that. We will protect the Greenbelt and we will not support proposals in contrast with that commitment. Municipalities will need to receive the endorsement from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, which could include conditions and requirements for the implementation of this bylaw. This is a piece of legislation that we have brought forward in order to increase the toolkit of municipalities when it comes to opening up their local municipalities for good jobs, something that Ontario needs, but especially Niagara needs. This tool will not override environmental, health, and safety protections, but will instead speed up the process of approvals to make sure that we can create jobs faster. Through the ministerial zoning order, which is a top-down process already, the minister already had the power to override certain acts in the name of planning. This bill does nothing to change that. It creates the ability for municipalities to approach the minister in an easier format. When it comes to protecting our environment, our government recently released our Made in Ontario environmental plan, and we are committed to strong enforcement action to protect our lakes, waterways, and groundwater from pollution. We are going to be building on the ministry's monitoring and drinking water source protection activities to ensure that we're protecting our pristine lakes, rivers, and trails. So let me reiterate. I'm born and raised here in the Niagara region. I grew up on a farm in Lincoln, right along the cusp of the escarpment. I've spent dozens, if not hundreds, literally hundreds of hours walking the Bruce Trail, spent a great deal of time in the Greenbelt. I've gone wading through Jordan Harbor. I love our lakes, I love our streams, I love our rivers. This bill will not do anything to change that. What it will do is make sure that we have jobs here in the Niagara region, that local municipalities have the tools that they need to say that not only Ontario is open for business, but Welland is open for business, that St. Catharines is open for business, that Grimsby is open for business. The bill that we have brought before the House, the bill that will restore Ontario's competitive advantage, will protect the Greenbelt, our water supply, and sensitive land, while giving municipalities the respect and tools they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the presenter? If, Councillor Nicholson.
All right.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you to the presenter for coming here today, and welcome to the region. Just a clarification point. I believe for the local municipality to pass one of the open for business bylaws, there's a couple conditions that had to be met. One of them was ministerial approval, and I believe the second one was prescribed criteria. And I was waiting to get some information on that. Perhaps you can clarify what these prescribed criteria would mean and what they would look like.
So a lot of the prescribed criteria would have to be those which are already set out in existing legislation, right? So you can't contradict the approval process. You can't just say, we no longer have to follow the environmental process to get our environmental assessments. We no longer have to follow all these necessary steps that protect those areas in case of property. And what this will also not do is it will not open up any residential land. And to your comment, Councillor Desero, I hope I pronounced that right. My apologies if I didn't. But this is specifically for employment land. This will not create the opportunity to create residential. And to whoever you were having that discussion with, I can assure you that that doesn't count as I know it is employment construction. I did framing myself for several years, but that doesn't count as employment land if they're building houses. So what this is going to do is say that within those industrial lands, let's make sure when that application is put forward to the minister that we're able to expedite that process. That instead of having to wait, as His Worship mentioned from West Lincoln, that instead of having to wait 5, 6, 7, 8 years, like we've heard, that they are able to get through that process. And this is actually something very similar to what we see in New York and other jurisdictions. In fact, New York has a 6-month guarantee. So they have the one-stop shop there and a 6-month guarantee. This is twice as long, but it's still a lot better than what we're seeing. But what it will also do is make sure that the minister still has the right to set out certain criteria. So for example, if there was the necessary, that desire for consultation as well, we'd be able to set out that criteria. Not myself, the minister.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. Thank you for coming. Glad you're here. I have a few questions for you, if that's okay. Could you explain to me why those various acts were included in Bill 66 then, if there's no intent to, and I'm going to use your word, override them or circumvent them? I don't understand why they're listed in that, like the Greenbelt, Clean Water Act, Great Lakes Source Protection Plan. Could you explain that to me, please?
Mm-hmm. So what this legislation does is it gives the minister essentially the power to expedite moving through that approval process, but we will not be accepting any proposals that touch on the Greenbelt Act or any other piece of environmentally sensitive land, such as the Oak Ridges Moraine. However, this is standard in that the minister's powers already do apply in those situations, and he would never use those powers, but he would already have that power within the Greenbelt as it is existing. So to make those changes, he's not going to do that, but they already exist as it is, so it's mentioned in that act.
So that's why they're included?
They're included in the plan within all those acts that are used in this particular situation that the minister has tools and powers over.
Okay, and could you, there's a piece in there about childcare and increasing the number of children that could be under somebody's care and the age of them, and I was wondering if you could speak to that. We actually have a concern from the region about that number increasing so that a childminder, a child care worker could essentially have more children under their care at a lower age. And I don't know how much experience you have with little people, but I can tell you as a mom, I do, and you need eyes in the back of your head when you get too many littles. on the loose. So could you speak to that? Because we have a concern at the region regarding that number.
For sure. So I didn't specifically come to address that particular issue, but I can actually speak to it because it's engaged in the ministry of which I'm a part, the Ministry of Education, which also has a component in governing childcare spaces. And I have 22 nephews and nieces myself, so believe me, I understand what it's like to love them when they come, but also love it when they leave. The reality is what we've seen in the province of Ontario is an increasing shortage in childcare spaces, and a lot of that is because of incredibly stringent guidelines around how many students, or sorry, how many children childcare providers could have under their care, including such restrictions as you wouldn't be allowed to, having your own children would count towards that total. So we're changing some of the criteria around that to make sure that we're able to respect caregivers and understand that we're giving them a little more leniency when it comes to the amount of children that they can have within those spaces before it's deemed to have filled their occupancy.
Well, I would just respectfully suggest that may really be a big issue in terms of safety for children. And that's my personal opinion, as well as some comments from our public health side.
Right.
And my last question is, are you concerned with the removal of the piece on public notice, consultation, and the right to appeal? That concerns me greatly. One of my biggest concerns is that this kind of situation could become the norm as opposed to the exception. So that more and more people, as they want to get in that queue to expedite different projects, the public will have less and less input, less and less ability to comment, less and less ability to even know what's going on in their community. Could you comment on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Butters. No, to answer your question, I don't have a concern around that for a couple of reasons. Each and every one of you had to go door knocking, I'm sure, during this last election. And on the doors, I'm sure you heard about the need for consultation, as did your local regional, or as did your local councillors in your local municipality. And they still have the ability, and in fact, I would encourage them to use that ability to hold consultations. This does not stop them from holding consultations. What this does do is, within a very particular set of circumstances for employment lands and that employment use, it says we do trust municipalities. We do trust municipalities to make some of their own decisions. And in particular, we were told by municipalities in our consultations that we held for the last half a year leading up to this point, that they felt they needed more tools at their disposal. So this bill is a way of giving local municipalities those tools, and it definitely doesn't preclude them from holding consultations.
Thank you, Councillor Campion.
Thanks, Chair, and excuse me. Thanks, MPP, for your presentation. And thanks for advertising our city municipality as well. Appreciate that. Excuse me. We firmly believe in Welland that we do need these tools. So we're very supportive of the concept of this type of tool, because we've had to work without the tool. It makes it very, very difficult. So when we're negotiating with somebody and we want them to come to our community and invest a significant amount of money, it gets down to time every time. It's always, how fast can I get in the ground, please? Because once I make my decision, I've got my money, and I want to be up and running and making money. So I'm going to ask the question, a lot of the problems that we had were very insignificant. Raising the height of a building by about 2 feet. So this is a 65-foot high building, getting 2 feet out of it. It's a nightmare trying to do that. But we need to make a decision quickly if we can. So we have to go to the ministry. We have problems with the MTO. So we go to the MTO, very small, minor thing. You know, we just have to change the intersection. We work well with the region here. So we do work together. And so this type of legislation, these types of tools, are you sort of thinking of them, a lot of them, as ways to overcome very insignificant issues that are held up by policy and legislation?
So one of the clear mandates that we received from the people of Ontario in the last campaign was a clear desire to see red tape reduced across industry and across a wide variety of sectors. It was one of the primary complaints that came up, whether it was from frontline workers in healthcare and in industry, within employment and labor. A lot of different areas brought it up as a primary concern. So we're absolutely examining all options to see what we can do to cut through that red tape. That being said, we understand there's an important place for meaningful regulation that protects health and safety, and that many regulations have a very good purpose for why they're there, and we need to examine them very carefully and make sure we're not just slashing regulations for the sake of slashing regulations. So this tool gives us an opportunity to cut through some of those time constraints and cut through some of those barriers while we are still completing our all of government approach to finding 25% reduction in red tape in regulations across the board.
So, as I say, I find this intriguing because we went from ministry to ministry to ministry searching for solutions, and I think this gives us that tool where we can find a solution very quickly. So I was going to ask you that. Is this going to be like a one-stop shop? And that's already been confirmed that you see that it would be. So I think the concept here, what I'm hearing from the other presenters is, yeah, we agree that you need tools, but you have to have checks and balances in place to make sure they're not used improperly. So, when I look at this, I look at it from the perspective of give me a good tool and let's not use it for evil purposes. Let's use this tool for what it's meant to be, and that is to expedite and to make things work without breaking the rules, but by finding solutions as we work through rules and policies. So I appreciate your comments, and do you have a comment on that final comment?
Well, I can't agree more. There's a basic principle in political philosophy, and it says the primary rule of good government is do no harm, right? And that's the first rule of good government, and I believe that this act does no harm. Contrary to what the other presenters have said, I would argue that it does not infringe on either the Greenbelt, on the clean water supply, or on any of our environmentally sensitive lands. What it does do is creates a tool that respects and trusts municipalities to make certain decisions in a more expeditious manner, and gives them that tool for employment purposes to make sure that we're able to have good jobs in the region of Niagara and across Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zalepa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. I can't help but think with the presenters, I've read two different books and got two different outcomes on the same story, it seems. I guess my question to the speaker is, what's the next step and process of Bill 66 when you go back to the House? What's going to happen here?
Yes, so we plan on returning to the legislature in February, and at that point, I'm not 100% sure on what the order of precedence are. There are a number of different pieces of legislation that are on the order paper right now, including an Education Act that I'm involved in, so part of me really wants to see that move forward before this, but I understand that this is something that we want to pass very quickly. It's a priority of the premiers, so I do expect it to move forward fairly expeditiously once the legislature returns.
Could also assume there would be a set of regulations that would be put forward for this as well, is that correct?
I do believe so.
Yeah, so then just hearing that, I know our staff, the commissioners presented some report. I hope it would come back to planning, and then we can discuss it more wholesome, so I appreciate it, and then we can give that feedback for the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Yip.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to follow up, first of all, on Councillor Butter's question about increasing the number of childcare spaces. If I heard you correctly, and I was searching for information at the same time, you said that there was not an increase in childcare spaces. It was about lowering the age at which people had to count their own children.
No, there is also an increase in the amount, yes.
Okay, yeah, so, and that's the report here that we will be talking about later, but I had asked at our December 13th council meeting for something in this regard. There are very serious concerns from a number of agencies that oversee childcare about that increase in numbers, particularly related to infants and that sort of thing. So do you have any comments about that?
We've also received a lot of supportive comments from a wide variety of stakeholders, and I would say that this is a first step towards making sure that we're able to increase the availability of childcare spaces in an area that drastically needs more spots.
Okay, and then you said that the Bill 66 does not touch, clean water or the green belt, but non-application of listed provisions from the Ontario Legislative Assembly. The following provisions do not apply to an open for business planning bylaw, Section 7 of the Greenbelt Act and Section 39 of the Clean Water Act. So Section 7 says that the decision made, well, I'm not going to read the whole thing, shall conform with the Greenbelt Plan, and that's not included in this as right? And Section 39 of the Clean Water Act, let me just find it again here. Again, a decision made shall conform with significant threat policies and have regard to other policies set out in the Source Protection Plan. So given that there's that non-application of provision, can you speak to that?
The minister's been very clear that these are powers that already currently exist, that the minister has power over, and he will not be allowing any projects to proceed, given that he has the ability to place certain terms and conditions. He would not allow any projects to proceed that would do anything to either inform the Clean Water Act or the Greenbelt Act.
But what's written here, does that not contradict what the minister is saying rather than what is actually written into potential legislation?
No, I believe that's what the minister has said and what he means.
But is it written into potential legislation?
So,
because that's the challenge, right? Is that people say things, and that's fantastic, but we all rely, as far as our tools go, on what is actually written into legislation.
And I would argue what is written into the legislation does not change anything in what the minister's current powers are. He already has all those tools through a ministerial zoning order to make any changes that he could make here. What this does is gives you as a municipality or your lower tier municipalities the ability to go to him and have that process laid out. So he already has all the powers that are laid out within this act.
Okay, I feel we're going to go around in circles on this. Again, because it says non-application of provisions, and it's if the Greenbelt is not at risk, if the Clean Water Act is not at risk, then those sections should be removed from the non-application of provisions.
I can raise that with the minister, but he's been very clear that the act is very clear that he already has these existing powers. What this does is creates that tool for the municipalities to ask him to use those powers in a one-year guaranteed process. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I want to thank you for coming out. I've never met you, and probably when you heard that the other speakers were going to be here, you came out. It had been easy to stay at home, but you came here and you're in our face to answer questions, and I respect that. My question to you is, I talked to Mayor Diodati from Niagara Falls today. As you know, he's nursing the sickness, and we talked at length at other things. But we talked about this too, and he said, oh, here we go again. People are going to think it's the end of the world coming on this. And I've heard negative and I've heard positive. And certainly there was a comment made by one of the speakers when it comes to jobs and environment. Environment comes first, and I agree with that. That's our future. But any good law has an appeal to it. So I want to dumb this down. And I want you to tell me if there's a verdict on any property or a decision on any property, and I'm just talking about properties with drinking water, or let's go to an extreme, say a factory's putting a peach orchard, and it's ruled that that's going to happen. What is the appeal for this to the citizens who are listening to this and thinking, oh no, it's all going to go to pot again. We're going to have another issue like Niagara Falls had in that. Could you tell me what is the appeal process for the people when the government makes a ruling on a property on something like that?
So currently already the minister does have that, again, to go back to Councillor Yip's point, the minister already does have the power to make those ministerial zoning orders, and there's not really a process, I believe, to appeal those direct orders. So typically when there's a process going now through the LPAT, or what used to be, you know, the OMB before it all got changed around. But currently right now, when that municipality would come and make that application, given the certain conditions and prerequisites that the minister would have to lay out in accepting that application for a bylaw, are you referring
and
to?
During that process, so through you, Chair, during that process, the people have access to a public forum and town hall type applications and that. The minister's just not going to take a property and make a decision on it to put a factory without going through the public. There are checks and balances along the way.
Right, and I think the important thing to note here is that this doesn't happen that the minister just comes in and says, here's a location, now we're going to
And that's what they're worried about.
That's what people are worried about. That's not going to happen. What would happen would be your local municipality, or whatever the lower tier municipality was, would say, we have a particular person, such as the case with GE, who has an interest in this site. This process will take us 7 years right now. How can we make sure that we expedite it? And the minister will say, okay, here are the steps that we need to take within our 1 year guaranteed, 1 year streamline guarantee, to make sure that we're able to get that property into that municipality.
Again, thank you for that answer, and I know it's also music to Councillor Dart's ears to hear that things can be moved faster for business and that, but there is the checks and balances behind it. Thank you.
Councillor Redekop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Oosterhout, for coming out. I'm a little baffled at why the minister would be providing the municipalities with the ability to ask for something that they can ask for now. Municipalities can ask for a minister's zoning order now if they wish. So what is the distinction in what we can do now and what municipalities will be able to do under Bill 66?
So what this does is it creates an ability for also the minister to move through a lot of different work with other ministries and make sure that they're moving through a lot of these issues very quickly. And although it doesn't give him any new powers, as stated, this doesn't change any of his existing powers. What it does do is create also the process that the Premier spoke about during the campaign, and which he wanted to make sure was very clear, to have a 1 year guaranteed process.
Mr. Chair, my understanding has always been, and I've been around for a while now, that if the minister wants to zone a piece of property in any fashion, the minister has the ability to do that. Is that wrong?
No, I don't
That's
believe
right.
so. I believe that is accurate.
So what this will do then, according to what I've been reading, is provide the municipality with the ability to deal with the developer, pass a bylaw without public consultation, present that to the minister, and then the minister would review it, I guess, and if the minister feels it's appropriate, then the minister will put on a zoning order?
The minister would have that ability, correct. And that's part of the process of making sure that that moves through in a year.
And just like a minister's order now, there'd be no appeal available to the public.
Correct.
So all this is really doing is institutionalizing a process at a lower level. Providing some cover for the minister?
No, what I believe this does is it creates that ability, again, for municipalities to move through the process faster and be able to make sure that they're able to deal with all these issues in a speedy time frame within that 1 year time frame.
Okay, and that's fine, but my understanding was that a municipality could ask the minister to do this in any event, and it's happened.
Okay.
Over the last 20 years, I'm aware of a number of occasions where minister's orders have been issued for specific land uses in areas where they weren't at the original point in time permitted to make use of whatever they're planning. As an example, some of the racetracks in the late 90s weren't zoned for gaming, but the minister at that time made orders and those racetracks were permitted then to have gaming. Ajax was an exception. It chose to have a public process. So I'd be concerned, I mean, I've been reading a fair bit here, I'd be concerned about the same things that Councillor Yip has raised relative to the applicability of certain legislation in the context of how this process unfolds. And I would think anytime the public is circumvented for local politics, I don't think that's good. That's my opinion.
Thank you, and as I mentioned earlier, I think it's very important that those local municipalities have that ability as well, right? And this doesn't preclude that local municipality from holding those consultations, and they would, I think, be heard from, they would hear from their constituents if they did move through this process without any consultation.
Thank you.
There being no other councillors who wish to ask questions or speak, thank you very much, Mr. Oosterhout, for
Thank you,
presenting.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Council. Appreciate the chance to come here.
Our next presenter will be Hugo Cheshire and Miska Balsam of the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce.
Good evening, Chair Broadley, Councillor staff and members of the public. My name is Mishka Balsam and I'm the CEO and President of the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, and with me tonight is Hugo Cheshire, our Director of Policy and Government Relations. On behalf of our members and the business community, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight on the subject of vacant land tax rebate. We are here, maybe not much differently than you are, because of our commitment to see Niagara at its best, both economically, socially, and listening to the conversation just now, environmentally as well. Vacant land is one of those opportunities where the public and private sector can work together, and we are here this evening in the spirit of collaboration and partnership. Historically, this rebate was introduced in the 1980s when business taxes were rolled into property taxes. It was recognized that this would effectively mean a tax increase, so vacant land rebate was introduced in compensation of that. Now it is proposed that the compensation be eliminated, but not the issue it compensated in the first place. The purpose of the program was not to discourage long-term use of land, and from our many consultations with developers and landowners, we still do not believe that it does. Vacant land is an asset to this region as it is to all regions across Ontario. It signals to people that there's room to grow and expand. Inventory of available land is important to attracting new industries, new businesses, and new development, the same as skilled workforce. One of GNCC's guiding principles when it comes to policy is that no issue can be addressed in isolation of another. And that is why we're here tonight. There are many reasons why land or building might be vacant. Some are due to issues with municipal and regional policy, such as road construction, parking availability, and red tape. The rebate is a partial compensation for when these policies make a landlord unable to rent, sell, or develop land. Dealing with these problems as part of this discussion might be very useful. Eliminating the rebate would encourage landowners to sever excess land and sell it. This discourages business from growing in place and means that when they're ready to expand, they may leave the region altogether. The rebate offers an incentive for businesses to stay in Niagara, to grow in Niagara by encouraging them to retain land for future expansion. We want to encourage businesses to grow here, not to leave. The staff report also mentions double dipping, wherein the property owners received reduced assessment from MPAC and then a second break in form of this rebate. Our members in the development and land owning business have all told us that this does not happen and that actually obtaining a reduced assessment from MPAC is nearly impossible. Keeping land empty is still a cost to landlords, and no one is interested in keeping land empty for merely qualifying for a 30% rebate on their property taxes. The report has drawn attention to the municipalities around us that have ended this rebate. It is our understanding that the vast majority have not. It is important to note that our economic situation is always different and not easily comparable to the regions around us. Niagara has a higher than average unemployment rate, slower economic growth when compared to Hamilton and the GTA. A recent independent economic comparison revealed that almost all of Niagara's recent economic growth is attributed to rising real estate prices. It also is worth noting that that fact by itself is increasing the property tax levy quite apart from the rebate question. Economic history and forecasts also show that a potential downturn in our economy is imminent. This is not a factor that this government can control, but it is one that we can anticipate and plan for. Anticipating a downturn cannot include placing further burdens on our business community. Industrial growth in Niagara is starting to pick up again after a long period of stagnation. Commercial growth has leveled off. We are asking that this council to not look at this tax rebate in isolation of an existing infrastructure backlogs, economic growth that we have experienced, the red tape that landlords and developers are experiencing, as well as considering the speed of investment return for developers who are working in Niagara. On behalf of our members and the business community, we encourage Niagara to do as 390 out of the 440 municipalities have done in Ontario, and that is to leave this program alone. It was introduced for a good reason, and that reason has not changed yet. On behalf of the business community we represent, I hope that you will recognize that the reasons for the vacant land tax rebate are unchanged, and the reasons to continue it are as valid as when the program was started, and you will continue this program. Thank you.
Thank you. You're presenting on behalf of both of you in this case. Any questions from members of council? Any questions to presenters? If not, sorry. If not, we thank you. Must be very thorough. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much for your time.
The next item I'm going to call, first of all, on Dr. Hergy, the Medical Officer of Health, for some introductory remarks before the next presentation. And then I'll be calling upon the delegation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the delegation for coming to talk about an issue that I think has really affected everybody in this room. And we're all, I think, resolved that we want to do something about the issue of suicide. I just wanted to make a few comments before we begin about the importance of the kind of language we use when we talk about this issue. There's a wealth of research that shows that certain types of language and certain types of words can cause other individuals to die by suicide, causing a sort of suicide contagion. And when we've seen what's happened in Niagara, unfortunately, in the last 3.5 months, where we've had multiple people die by suicide in similar means, that's really an example of contagion. And so I think it's very important that we're careful about our language. So I wanted to just give a few pointers for all of us in this room to be aware of so that we can have a healthy debate that ensures we don't put others at harm and allows us to come to a conclusion of what we want to do to really improve the life of people in our community and prevent suicide. So the first guideline I just want to make here is that we want to try and avoid making specific mentions about the location or the ways individuals have died by suicide. You may see in the report that will be discussed later, the report I wrote, I tend to talk about an item of infrastructure rather than the specific location. As well, when I talk about the means by which people have died, I've used passive language such as people died from falling from a height, rather than the kind of action of the individual taken. And so that kind of more passive language and indirect language is quite helpful. On a similar vein, words are often used such as committed or a successful attempt or someone took their life. That kind of language is harmful. And so we want to try and use, again, more indirect language, such as dying by suicide, and that's really the preferred phrase to use. Of course, we don't want to portray suicide as something that's desirable or accomplishing something, so we want to avoid words that tend to hint that it's somehow something that's productive. So saying it relieves pain or suffering, or leads to peace, or leads people to be in a better place, well, definitely, sentiments we might want to share are not really the kinds of language we want to use when talking about suicide. On the flip side, though, we do want to highlight that suicide is something that can often be prevented if people get the right kind of services, support, and treatment. And so if we can mention those sorts of concepts whenever it's appropriate to do so, that's quite helpful. And lastly, I just want to emphasize that suicide is, of course, a very complicated problem. And when we try to portray it in overly simple terms, it can lead individuals who are suffering from mental illness to feel people don't understand the difficulties they're going through. So if we can all remember that suicide is a very complicated issue, I think that would be helpful. With that said, I look forward to hearing from our delegation and what thoughts they may have on what we can do to prevent suicide in Niagara.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I will now call upon the presenters, Wendy Duggan, Amy Christie, Colleen Mayer, Jesse Dent, and Steffi Farquharson to the podium.
Hello.
Welcome.
I'm new at this. Hello, and thank you for allowing me to join you and speak tonight. My name is Wendy Duggan, and I'm here with Niagara United, Colleen, Stephanie, Jesse, and Amy. We are here to discuss preventing suicide on public infrastructures. We have a few key points we think are important to discuss when it comes to this issue. We think it is important to start with addressing the data and the numbers put forth on this issue just last week. The data being used seems to be outdated by about a decade. The data being used is from 2008 to 2012. According to those numbers, there is an average of 44.4 suicides yearly within the Niagara region. Niagara United contacted the coroner's office last week by email and a day later received his most current data, which is from 2012 to 2016. We've chosen to use this data in our numbers today. According to these numbers, there is an average of 55.6 suicides yearly within the Niagara region. That's a difference of 11.2 yearly. And even this most recent data does not include 2017 or 2018, where we actually had the issue. In our opinion, using the most recent and current data moving forward would be a great start to preventing suicide. Likewise, in 2018, a report the World Health Organization put out called for improved availability and quality on data on suicides and suicide struggles globally, saying they were, begin quote, required for efficient suicide prevention. It went on to say suicide is masked in stigma, shame, and misunderstanding. This means that people often do not or cannot seek adequate help. Prevention of suicide cannot be accomplished by one person, one organization, or one institution alone. It requires support from the whole community. The whole community contribution is essential to any national suicide prevention strategy, end quote. Next, we would like to touch on the expenditures for this project. It has been estimated to have a price tag of $4 million to install barriers on said public infrastructure. We thought we could take a moment to touch on how much suicide costs per individual. The only Canadian report we could find was a complete cost of suicide analysis with the actual numbers on the cost of suicide from a New Brunswick study in 1996. Suicide deaths affect society by consuming both lives and economic resources. The study estimates the economic impact of suicide using the human capital approach. It contained within it all direct costs included within it all direct costs, including all goods and services used for ambulance, police investigation, hospitals, physicians, autopsies, funerals, and cremation, totaling $535,185. The indirect costs, which estimate the value of lost productivity due to premature death, which society must bear over time, these costs had the largest economic value of $79,353,354. The mean total, which is the cost of death per suicide in 1996, was $849,877. To our knowledge, this report provides the first and only complete cost of suicide analysis performed in a Canadian province. Now let's say we use that number, which again I would like to say is from 1996 and without the current inflation rate of 48.83% according to the Bank of Canada. But we take that number and use it with our loss of life to suicide here in Niagara, which we determined earlier was 55.6 people annually on average. Then it would have cost on average $47,253,205 each year for the past 5 years. Now these are not all by suicide falls, but again, we can take our suicides by fall, which was 3, and use the baseline of $849,877, giving us an average total of $2,549,633 in 1 month. And even that's debatable. That is more than half of the cost of the estimated barriers, leaving this an issue a little less debatable, as $4 million divided by cost per suicide of $849,877 is 4.7 people, our people. I would like to just take one step further here. The inflation rate I spoke about that was set out by the Bank of Canada as of 2018 is 48.83%. Now added to the above numbers with inflation would be as follows. The actual direct cost would be $796,476, and the indirect cost would be $118,101,597, and the mean total would be $1,264,873 per suicide in 2008. If we take that number again and take our suicides by fall, which was 3, that would give us a total of $3,794,619 in 1 month, just October of last year. Leaving us with the question, is saving 4.7 lives worth $4 million? When if we don't do it, it will cost us $3,794,619. With this, the possibility of that amount, with the possibility of that amount to rise with every fall that does happen there. We understand installing the barriers at one location won't prevent people from seeking out other locations, but according to the information that follows, Dr. Mark Senior from Sunnybrook Hospital spoke with about the public infrastructure in Toronto, saying a previous report that examined data suggested suicide had relocated to other nearby infrastructures, but the latest research suggested suicide rates across the city dropped over the long term after the barrier went up. He went on to say, there was a spike in suicide. His researchers now attribute that to the finding that heavy media coverage of the debate as to whether the barriers were worthwhile. But his study also stated that over the following 1 to 3 years, it fell 6% at all infrastructures in the surrounding area. Adding to that, at Edmonton's high-level infrastructure, city statistics indicated the number of both suicides and general mental health calls were cut in half a year after barriers were installed in 2005. Sadly, places with height will always be an option if available. Moving forward, we feel it's important to touch on the height of the public infrastructure we are speaking of and the MTO-owned highway below. While researching, we came across a detailed paper from NASA about the effects of large accelerations or decelerations on the human body. To summarize the paper, there were a lot of factors like how you land and the surface you land on. For this, we will be using the hard surfaces as per what we're discussing here tonight. If a fall was to happen at just over 7 meters, which is roughly 23 feet, you would travel at 12 meters per second, which is equal to 43 kilometers an hour. Surviving that fall would be likely, but would likely involve life-changing injuries. If a fall happened between 7 meters and 12 meters, which is roughly 40 feet, you would travel at 12 to 17 meters per second, which is anywhere between 43 and 61 kilometers an hour. Surviving that fall would be a may or may not outcome. If a fall happens at 12 meters or above, which is 40 feet or more, you would travel at over 17 meters per second, which is equivalent to 61 kilometers an hour or more, and this would likely end with loss of life. The public infrastructure we are discussing tonight stands at 25 meters in height, which is 82 feet tall. In our opinion, with this known information, it should be mandatory for an infrastructure standing above 12 meters or 40 feet to have mandatory barriers added directly into the new infrastructure plan or the build. Using these same NASA velocity theories, for 25 meters, you would travel at a rate of 90 kilometers an hour. Yes, 90 kilometers an hour with a highway directly beneath it. We don't think we even need to say how potentially harmful that can be to those whom are not suicidal, but rather driving the highway to work, school, or home. Barriers would not only protect the vulnerable whom are falling from the infrastructure, but also the many citizens and tourists coming and going from our region that are using this main artery highway below. In closing, Niagara United believes that the people of our region are worth the $4 million to just not have that as an option anymore. We are aware that this is not a solution to suicide or the mental health crisis here in our region. We know that more money is needed in services and are currently standing in solidarity with MPP Wayne Gates to see the motion for $2.5 million to get provincial funding flowing down to this region as it is all needed. And we would love support on this matter moving forward from council as well, as it is a long road ahead. We know in argument it is asked, why not just put the $4 million into mental health services in the region? And my question is, how far does $4 million really go, and what guarantee is there that it will be preventative to stopping the contagion on said infrastructure? We are in crisis whether the media, the data, or the information being given reflects that. Accountability on all the accurate information is necessary to move forward and tackle all the hurdles within the mental health fight for better care. But the barriers are something that the region can do to start a suicide prevention strategy here. The barriers are a now solution to a problem that needs fixing, and when you can do something that you can change the outcome in the future, then why not?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Other questions? Councillor Sendzik.
Thank you, through the chair. First, thank you very much for your presentation, and for background for this council, how long has Niagara United been around?
Since October, beginning of October.
And since the beginning of October, you have taken a leadership role in the community, and this isn't the first council you've been in front of, and you've also just briefly touched on some of the other initiatives that you're working on.
We are working with Queen Gates on getting the 2.5 million down here. We're working on everything, anything.
You had an initiative in Niagara Falls that you were working on where you're bringing groups together that are talking.
We have MAPS meetings, so we have them now in St. Catharines on every Wednesday night, in Niagara Falls every Thursday night. They're peer support groups. They're running very well. Actually, we've been asked to bring them out to Welland too. We're providing bridges of hope.
Yep.
Where things are lacking. So it's not that we're asking not to put the money somewhere else. We are actually providing the others something else. Yeah, we're just, anything that needs to be worked on or needs to be fought for, or we're going to do that. We're going to speak for the people that can't speak.
And you held a symposium, I believe, at Brock University.
We did.
And that was, again, attended by a number of folks. One of the questions about the report is it also talks about mental health hubs that are part of it where there'll be some funding required. Are you supportive of mental health hubs, much like the mapping that you're doing, but a permanent location?
Absolutely. Like that would be ideal. I actually was reading over the last report, and I do like the idea of the CAMH coming down, like a Center for Addiction and Mental Health, because in ours it is all included. Addiction and suicide are just symptoms of mental illness. So, yeah.
Through the chair. Oh. Wow, magic.
Well, it's in order to keep me quiet.
Through the acting chair, I would like to say thank you for putting a different look on the data that has been provided to us today. I think it's important that when we look at the infrastructure, we also look at the amount of dollars that are being spent and amortize it over the 75 years of the life of that structure. And the way you've positioned it and the history moving forward on that structure really does make this a very small investment into something that's going to be there for a long period of time. So I just want to publicly say thank you for the work that you're doing. It's not easy work, and there's a lot of lived experience that is included in Niagara United. So your voice is a very strong voice in our community when it comes to mental health.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the presenters? Councillor Dart.
Ladies, again, I'd like to commend you and thank you for doing what you're doing, and I know it's not that easy, that's for sure. Question, you talked about a barrier. Is there any particular barrier that you have in mind, or are you going to leave that up to us to think about?
I think that I think I'll leave it up to you guys, because I think that the barrier was an issue before in the design. I think that's probably maybe a good portion of why it wasn't included back then. So I mean, for us, we don't really care what it is as long as it's stopping the suicide from happening. So yeah, up to you guys.
Councillor Dart. No. Okay. Any others who have questions? Councillor Rigby does. Councillor Rigby.
See, it's good you came back. Just a question, because part of your presentation you were talking about just over the highway. I know that what we're looking at is an infrastructure which could be over the complete bridge. Are you suggesting it only needs to be over the highway, or are you looking at the full bridge?
My concern and why I said the highway was because, I mean, I am concerned for the whole bridge, but over the highway, we're now, when we leave that open for people to fall, there's other people underneath. Like, it's not just in themselves, they're now involving other people, which could create, so much more. When somebody is affected by suicide, or they themselves, it does affect their family members and everybody around them. So when you start to include more people, we're just actually burdening the system more by not solving the problem. It's more people going to mental health, more people trying to access these services that we already are having a problem accessing. So
I've heard it described as a shift of the burden to the people who are left, and which is sad. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Encina.
Thank you, Chair. I commend your work.
Thanks.
I really do. That's one facility that we're addressing. Where do you see us going from there? Where do we go next? I don't mean to, like, what do we have to do next then? If we're going to look at one means, there are so many other out there. This is on the list of 5 or 6. This ranks kind of third and amongst the others. Okay, and that's what I'm having a hard time dealing with. I understand that there are a lot of personal feelings around that one area, and I really do get it. But if we do it for one, we have to do it for others, do we not?
Do you mean other, like the same type of infrastructure, or just like different places?
Other structures like that.
Okay, so I think, in my opinion, we should do it on any one in the future that is above the velocity rate that I said is like, it's a non-living situation afterwards. Obviously, we can't go back and do the 1,200 bridges that we have, because that's just ridiculous. But I mean, they all will come up to be, rebuilt or, fixed or whatever. And I think at that point, then maybe we should think about adding them in if there's a need. I think that this one in general, it does have a contagion. I mean, it's happening there right now, and so we need to address it right now. I don't. That's how I feel. I think that right now we are talking about this infrastructure, and that this one is has the need right now. I say if the need came up on any of those other infrastructures, you'll probably see me standing here again. So.
Well, I guess if you look at it from the other side, shouldn't we be attacking the root cause?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And this is what I'm saying. So if there's an issue at that one area, let's get our trained people. It's not going to cost $4 million during the couple months or this contagion period. All right, have our trained people there, standing there at night or walking the bridge at night, having CCTV cameras up to see if there's something going on that we can put someone there and talk to somebody. Again, my comments from before, a barrier can't talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
A person can talk to you.
Absolutely. That's why we
there are signs there now, but the sign's not going to do anything for you. If you call a phone number and you get a busy signal, or if you call a phone number and you get put on hold. So I guess my point is, in what I'm looking at, and I'm hoping you're going to go through this and look at it, is awareness through the root cause, the mental health issue, and not so much the barrier, but let's direct it towards educating the public, educating the people that are in crisis to say, hey, you have somewhere to go, you have somewhere to talk to, whether it be a hub or something else like that. That's my only concern with putting that money in there. I would really love to see.
No, absolutely. Like I want this. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to point out, if you look at the Mental Health Commission of Canada, they released a booklet called Roots of Hope. And it's a 5-pillar strategy that communities can implement for not only suicide prevention, but also intervention. And yes, you're right. We need to address the mental health in those 5 pillars. That is part of it. It's also education. It is training for healthcare professionals.
Absolutely.
But it is the intervention part that they suggest in those 5 pillars is barriers on key infrastructures. So that is all part of the 5-pillar strategic plan that communities can implement when it comes to suicide prevention and intervention. And that is suggested by the Mental Health Commission of Canada.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bellows.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your bravery for coming here today to speaking about it. Years ago, suicide was never spoken about. In the last 10 years, I attended a U.S. Veterans Conference on suicide, and it was a 3-day conference, and I was a speaker there. And the one thing I took away from that conference is, if you ask 90% of the people, if you even have an inkling, if they're going to commit suicide, if you look them right in the eye and hold their hand or just touch their shoulder and ask them, are you thinking of committing suicide? They will tell you yes, because they want the help. They want help. And so to anybody that's listening, that's one thing that I learned, and I've used it before, and it's worked. So for what it's worth, I thought I'd just add that. I'm no expert, but I got a lot from that U.S. Veterans Conference in the States. And that was I really liked what you had to say, because I think it's mental health, it's having that group of responders there, you know, around that facility watching. Since the last occurrence, I think in the last month and a half, there hasn't been anything, because there's been nothing out in the media that I know of. But what I'm saying is that when I drive underneath that barrier, it's almost like when I drive under the Welland Canal. You just kind of get that, through the tunnel, you get that feeling, is there someone out there? And it's scary. So I understand what you're saying about putting other people at risk besides the person that's contemplating it and their families. I don't know what the right answer is, but I cannot see barriers on every infrastructure. I just can't see it. But I appreciate what you've said, and just keep on doing the work that you're doing. And you know, hopefully when you do have your groups here, that you could send out an invite to us to come and attend.
Absolutely.
I, for one, would like to come.
Absolutely.
So thank you for your work, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bellows. Any reaction from the delegation?
No, we do have MAPS meetings, so please come. St. Barnabas, St. Catharines, every Wednesday, 7 to 9. And anybody's more than welcome to come and just check it out and even see what it's about. Maybe you need it for knowledge is power, and so like that's great. We too we want training. We want a better hospital intake. There's lots of things that we want to do other than stand here, talk about netting or barriers on a bridge. But this is the issue right now at hand. So this is what we need to talk about, and we would love for it to just. For the city and for us and everybody to just show them that we do care. We care what happened there in the last 3 months, and we want to put an end to it. We care about the city, and we want the people to actually be able to go out and seek the help. And that's our main focus, is to get back to doing that with the actual things that both of you were speaking about, and actually do the hard work, because it's not going to take $4 million. It's going to take millions and millions, and really we need to be fighting provincial, and that's what we want to be doing. But to be honest with you, we went to Queen's Park, and on that day we came back to 5. There was 5 people that had lost their life the day that we went there. And that was while we were down there fighting to get this money down. So like, as much as we understand exactly what you're saying, and that it's a provincial thing and we need to go and get money, and the reality is, while we're doing that, this is still going on. So we need to address the now so that we can carry on for the future, I think.
Thank you very much to our presenters.
Thank you.
We appreciate your appearance. At this point in the meeting, I'm going to have my brief report to you. It ordinarily comes earlier, but it's coming at this point in time. Just a report on some activities from this week. Last Wednesday, I joined Mayor Senzik at the Hotel du Shaver Health and Rehabilitation Center for a presentation by the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. It was announced at that gathering that the Government of Canada would support family caregivers with employment insurance benefits that are more flexible, inclusive, and easier to access. It is estimated that more than 20,000 claims will be established for the new caregiving benefits by the fall of 2019, and the people who are there were pleased to know that many of our residents will feel less of a financial burden with this new initiative. As far as the budget is concerned in this committee, this council, Niagara Region has begun deliberating on the 2019 budget, and our capital budget represents a substantial investment in order to facilitate growth and attract new investment in Niagara. The effective management of the Niagara Region budget is vital to the continued prosperity of our residents and communities. I know we are ready to work towards positioning Niagara as the best possible course for future success. I'm excited to tackle these important governance challenges together with Council as we look at growth, asset management, and funding strategies that will benefit our region. On Tuesday, I was pleased to once again to join Mayor Senzik in congratulating the Big Brothers Big Sisters for 27 years of their Bowl for Kids' Sake campaign. A strong community relies on volunteer work of many residents, and this program has allowed youth to achieve their goals and enhance their social well-being for many years. And while this was in St. Catharines, we know that around the region there are people who are supporting this same initiative for Big Brothers Big Sisters. It's a yearly occurrence, and it is well supported by participants, by sponsors, and by the general community. I also had the opportunity to attend with a number of members of Regional Council a roundtable discussion on housing initiatives with the Honourable Steve Clark, Ontario Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. That roundtable was arranged by Niagara West MPP Sam Oosteroff. The attendees had an opportunity to ask questions of and share opinions and observations with the Minister. And both the elected representatives who were there and representatives of various agencies, boards, and commissions dealing with housing, as well as the general public who were invited, found this to be a very interesting exercise. The Minister listened with a good deal of attention, took notes, and engaged in a dialogue with those who were there. So it was nice to have that happen. That took place in the town of Pelham. We will now move to, I could give you a report on the first week of GO Transit. I think it's going to be more appropriate when it's established and well-known to give a more fulsome report at that time. The real reason is there's something called total alightings, and I have to figure out what total alightings are, unless there's someone here who knows what an alighting is, because they have boardings, alightings, and a daily average. But I do think you would want me to give a report which is more fulsome when we've had an opportunity to see how it is working. We now get to the adoption of minutes of meetings that have taken place. So I call on Councillor DeZero for the motion to adopt the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I would like to move, seconded by Councillors Alepa, the following minutes of Regional Council be adopted. Open session minutes, CL 19, 2018. Open and closed session minutes, CL 20, 2018. Open and closed session minutes, CL 21, 2018. And open session minutes, CL 1, 2019.
Any discussion of the minutes? If not, I'll call the motion. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. We now have correspondence that you see before you. I call on Councillor Ugolini for the motion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Jordan, that the items to be received and or referred be dealt with as noted in the council agenda and if issued, addendum.
Any discussion? If not, I'll call the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Now we have for consideration a progress report respecting implementation of recommendations from the Ontario Ombudsman report called Press Pause. I ask for a mover and seconder for the motion. Councillor Easton, and I'm going to get somebody from the second row in this case. Oh, no, Councillor Wirbeen. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next is the Regional Council ante-room. Okay. I would like a mover and seconder for the motion. Any discussion? Councillor Foster? Okay, seconder. Councillor Whalen. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next will be a memorandum from the regional clerk dated January 17, 2019, respecting Councillor Junkin's request for appointment to the Transportation Steering Committee. Mover, Councillor Zalepa. Seconder, who hasn't seconded for a while? Councillor Nicholson, how's that? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Trying to spread them around if I can. Not so well. Next is the extension of the Integrity Commissioner's contract. Motion. Councillor Ugolini, seconder, Councillor Edgar. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Now a memorandum from the regional clerk dated January 17, 2019, respecting appointment to the Southwestern Integrated Fiber Technology Board. Mover, Councillor Bilsma. Seconder, Councillor, who's going to get, over here, Dart. Councillor Dart's going to have a chance.
Point of order,
Any
Chair.
discussion?
Point of order, Chair, we have to have a name.
Oh, okay, hold on. The correspondence received, the councillor name be appointed as Niagara Region's representative. So we got to move the councillor. And who is that going to be? Who would like to be on that? Councillor Bilsma wants to be. So Councillor Bilsma.
You have to hear what I have to say. I'd like to nominate Councillor Foster for this.
I thought you were going to volunteer.
No, I wasn't. Okay. I was going to put it off to someone else before they nominated me.
Okay, we have a nominator, Councillor Easton. You're seconding it. Any more nominees? Looks like Councillor Foster is uncontested. So all in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. That may be a bit defensive, that one, I think. What else have I got here? Okay, the next one is a letter from M. Oppenlander, Chair, Matthias, that is, Chair, Grape Growers of Ontario, respecting a request for a council resolution supporting 100% Ontario-grown grapes and wine. So, all in favor. Councillor Jordan is moving it. Who else comes from wine country? Okay, I'm going to say Councillor DeZero, seconding that. Any discussion? Councillor Sensic.
Through the chair, and at the St. Catharines Council meeting on Monday, we had approved a little bit more of a detailed motion, and I believe also that the town of Lincoln, the town of Niagara-on-Lake, they've had motions passed by their council, and if you look to their clerk, because one of the directions of our council was to send it to the region for consideration, and this one paragraph is somewhat accurate, but what we've also moved towards is supporting this, but also including craft beer, as it has shown itself to be a significant employment opportunity here in Niagara. Investments have been made, and we also have Niagara College, which is graduating people within the beer sector, so in the brewery sector. So if we can possibly bring up that motion through the clerk.
We would like to have included at the end of it craft beer.
I'll wait for a direction from the clerk if we're able to bring that up.
Can that be done?
So there was twofold to it. It was the inclusion of the craft beer. It was also more directional towards the retail sector, so that any policy that would be adopted by the provincial government when it came to retail sale of wine and beer in the private stores, that there would be regulation around inclusion of 100% Ontario-grown, Niagara-grown wine and beer. So it's much more impactful. If we're going to comment on the modernization of alcohol sales, we should be a little bit more direct than what's in front of us today. That's all I'm asking.
Any discussion on that? I'm going to say Councillor Dart. Looks like he has a
I have a
comment.
conflict of interest. I'm
Councillor
a
Dart.
co-owner in a craft brewery, so I have a conflict.
Oh, we have a conflict of interest. Thank you. So are we going to be able to accommodate that?
We can include it.
We're going about trying to include it now, as something that we can all agree with. Because right now it simply says that the letter be received and the regional chair be directed to draft a letter to the provincial government and area MPPs. As says on your screen, there's been a suggestion from Councillor Senzik, a significant modification to this to make it more impactful, and the clerk is working on that at the present time.
I can take it and add what you said.
What's that?
We can take it as directed. Yeah. I'll include it when we do the minutes.
Okay.
If council's fine with those changes.
If council is fine with this, we'll do this when we do the minutes. We'll have it included in the minutes. Is that fine? Okay. Was that a motion I had before me on this one?
Yes. You just have to call the question.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And next we have Bill 66, Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act, legislative amendments related to home child care programs.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yes.
This is the one I need to
Okay. Councillor Edgar has declared a conflict and will not participate. Is there a motion in this regard? It says the following, that the regional chair be directed to write a letter to the Ministry of Education containing the recommended changes to Bill 66 as they relate to home child care, and to include this report in for the consideration. You see on your screen the motion. We should get a mover and seconder then. And we have Councillor Houston is moving it. And seconding it is going to be Councillor Butters. And speakers to it?
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Stanzik, yeah.
In terms of the delegation that had presented, where's the opportunity that a motion can be brought onto the floor related to Bill 66? Is that something that would come in under other business, or is this? Just looking for a direction.
It would have to go under other business, yes.
Okay, so that'll be under other business. There has been a motion that has been submitted that could be for discussion, as there is a timeliness to it.
Okay, next speaker on this will be Councillor Zalepa.
So just further to that, Mr. Chair, would it not be possible to accept an amendment on that to refer the delegation information regarding Bill 66 to Planning Commissioner for a report back through the Planning Committee? I thought that would make sense, but I don't know if is that not acceptable process at this point?
I'll look to the clerk.
Through you, Chair, the motion that's on the screen relates specifically to the parts of Bill 66 that relate to the home child care programs. So I would suggest that it wouldn't be appropriate to include the planning piece with that.
Okay, I have a mover and seconder, I believe, on that. And so any further discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And the next will be committee reports. Committee reports contain the recommendations of each committee as they were debated at the respective committee meetings. If any member wishes to speak to a particular item on a committee report, the member may lift the item from the minutes to be considered separately. Councillor Yip.
Thank you. I'd like to lift item 6.1 from PW3 2019 with respect to base services for the next collection contract.
We would require a motion for that. Oh. Okay. Councillor, first of all, we'll have Councillor Rigby have a motion to put it on the floor. So I'll call on Councillor Rigby for the motion, and then we'll have discussion. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a motion moved by by myself and seconded by Kelly Edgar that report PWC 1-2019 being the open session minutes of the Public Works Committee meeting held on Tuesday, January 8, 2019 be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved.
Okay, we have speakers and we have Councillor Butters after Councillor Yip. Councillor Yip and then Councillor Butters.
So I'd like to move that we defer any decisions to make changes to the waste collection service delivery until such time as we can obtain feedback through the Accessibility Advisory Committee with respect to how those service delivery changes might impact the communities of people who live with various disabilities.
Seconder for that motion? Councillor Butters, second the motion. Discussion? Councillor Butters? Oh, there's no discussion on it? All right, I have to call the question apparently. Councillor Rigby.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but the sound went off when the motion was being brought. I have no idea what was asked.
I see. Go ahead.
The motion is to defer any decisions to make changes to waste collection service delivery until such time as we can obtain feedback through the Accessibility Advisory Committee with respect to how these service delivery changes might impact the communities of people who live with various disabilities.
And that was seconded by Councillor Butters, and apparently there's no discussion on that particular motion permitted.
So, point of
Yes,
clarification.
Councillor Stanzik.
I'll ask the clerk this point of clarification. In terms of the process, we're looking for we're moving towards a tender. It has nothing to do with change of services. It's just entering into a tender option. So I'm just wondering through the clerk if there could be some guidance provided on this.
The acting CAO.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The motion does not present a concern in terms of timing. As was passed by Public Works Committee and to be possibly deferred, we're going to go forward with preparing the contract document or the tender document. It was always going to have an option on the different kinds of service level that will come back to council anyway. As well, that staff are reporting back to council after we did the round of consultation with local municipalities and understand the enhanced services. So it was coming back anyway, and we're going to ensure that there's engagement with the Accessibility Committee.
Okay, we'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, now I have to call the motion on the balance of the recommendation that report PWC 1-2019 being the open session minutes of the Public Works Committee meeting held on Tuesday, January 8, 2019 be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. So we'll go to the next one, which will be Public Health and Social Services Committee. I'm going to call on Councillor Greenwood for the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a resolution before me, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Witteveen, that report PHSSC 1-2019 being the open session minutes of the Public Health and Social Services Committee meeting held on Tuesday, January the 8th, 2019 be received, and the recommendations contained therein be approved.
Thank you. A seconder for that motion? Okay, you have your seconder. Yes, thank you. Any discussion? Your name is on the list. So Councillor Gale tells me his name's on the list.
Thank you,
So he
Chair.
gets to speak.
I was gonna wave my hand, but I figured pushing the button is the way we should do it. I'd like to lift item 6.3 because I got a comment and a question on it, if I can, please.
Okay.
Thank you. My first is a comment. Dr. Hirji's not here. I wanted to compliment him on his fulsome report on it and on a tough job that he did such a good job. So if you can pass it along to him when he comes back and sits on the chair, I'd appreciate it. But I have a question on part 3 of that. I'm trying to read it. Is it a done deal, or are we waiting for him to come back with another report on it before we do it? I know we're committing the funds to it, excuse me, or allowing the funds to it, but is it a done deal then? Or are we waiting for another report from him in 2 or 3 months before we do it?
Acting CAO.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The passing of number 3 effectively puts it into our budget process. Council will then have to ratify the capital budget process in February when we bring the full budget back to you. Capital budget was last week approved in principle. Its final ratification will come with the overall budget in February, and that'll be the final decision on whether this is approved to go forward.
So it's all based on the money, it's not based on the idea. Is that what I'm led to believe? In other words, it's already set, it's just we're getting the money through the budget and allowing for it. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's correct. We are moving forward with it. I'm just saying that there's a final approval of the budget amount.
Councillor Gale.
Okay, I have questions on it. I didn't plan on asking them today. I wanted to ask them in a couple months because I thought I had to leave halfway through that report and go to a meeting of police. But regardless of that, I don't want to ask them right now. I wanted to ask them when it comes back. But there's not going to be a report on this at all when it comes back, is it? It's just for funding.
CAO.
The actual motion still requires to come back for information to provide the details on.
So I can ask questions, and that's all I wanted to hear. And forecast, a couple months? Do you have any idea? Please.
Through you, Chair, we're estimating to come back to council with the procurement process summer this year.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Chair. I don't want to get too much into it, but I guess I have to ask this because you're doing the design now. Is that right, CAO?
That's correct.
So I guess I have to ask this question. If someone goes over and lands in, what's to find the person? In other words, if it happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, is the person there for 6 hours? I wanted to make sure that that is addressed.
Through you, Chair, a definitive answer is a function of the final design, but the way it's currently envisioned in the conceptual design, there will be an ability to get out.
Okay, I just have to have that explained to me because in the darkness at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm just coming up with the time, at 7 o'clock at night, and this weather, it'd be a horrible situation. Doctor, I'm explaining, I think you caught, I gave you a compliment too, through your chair,
yes,
on that report, because what you did, but regardless, I have a question on that, and I don't know if you heard my question, but I have a concern on that. If it can be addressed, or you want to talk to me out at another spot.
CAO.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I was just going to suggest that I could actually review with you, and I think your concern is being addressed.
Okay, well, if you can talk to me down the way, I'd appreciate it just to find out. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Gale. Councillor Butters.
Sorry, I'm still figuring out these buttons. I have an item to list, but not speaking to this item.
Somebody else is speaking to this item, and we need to call the question on this item.
Anyone else speaking on this item right now? By the way, it'll be Billsma.
Thank you for it, and I appreciate the sensitivity of the nature and of the topic. And I find it difficult to raise concerns, but I'm going to raise the issue of liabilities. Have we had a legal opinion with respect to the concept on this particular piece of infrastructure, or should we go down that road, other pieces of infrastructure? Do we have is there any legal or jurisprudence or precedent that has been set? I'm sure that this has been a concern on the Brooklyn Bridge or something like that. So I was wondering if that's part of the process, or if I can get an answer to that. I don't think we have legal here tonight, but it's a concern that I have as part of the ongoing dialogue with respect to that. And if that answer can't be provided here tonight, which I don't suspect it will be, when this returns, if that opportunity to get some kind of opinions, some legal opinions with respect to liability concerns with regard to equipment of this nature.
Yep.
CAO?
Through you, Chair, I prefer to follow up at a subsequent discussion on this with the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Councillor Butters.
Thank you. I'd like to lift 8.1.
We're gonna stay on this.
Oh,
I
okay.
will come back to you. I apologize. Come back to you. Councillor Rigby.
Yeah,
We'll come back to you, Councillor
Mr.
Butters.
Chair, I'm not sure whether I should be answering this or not, but however, I will attempt. The question that Councillor Bilsma has, there is risk management done by our insurers, and they do look at that structure, and they may have further detail, which I'm sure our legal will be able to provide us, probably in camera.
Okay. Call a motion on this now.
Call the question on this.
Okay, I'll be calling the question on this now. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Should I go to Councillor Butters? Now Councillor Butters.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Bradley. If I
Thank
could
you for your
lift-
patience.
Sorry for I goofed up. So could I lift 8.1?
Okay, you'd like to speak to 8.1?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess my question really is, when I was at that meeting, a couple of things that I brought up and asked questions about, and it was in regards to the conditions and that were brought to me by a resident, concerns with our paramedics and dispatchers, and we have some in the audience tonight, and we have Chief Smith here too, which is good. But one of the, part of that discussion involved that he had told us that there was like 6% of the force off with stress leave. And we asked him how that compared to other services, and he had said that he was going to investigate that and come back with that kind of information, which I think will be helpful. He also gave us his to-do list and how they were managing and contributing to improving mental health issues surrounding that. But it's not reflected in those minutes that those were things that he was going to do. And it also doesn't reflect that he was asked and he agreed that he would come back to the committee with updates as well as input from the paramedics and dispatchers themselves in how successful or not, what they're trying to roll out to help people is actually accomplishing that task. So I know Chief Smith is here. Maybe he can clear that up, or maybe this can be included. I just don't want this to fall off the radar when it's such an important issue. When we have people off on stress leave, we need to be dealing with that. Well, I think we should be on top of that as an employer. Thank you.
Thank you. Clark?
You want to talk about the detail in the minutes? Or?
CAO?
Through you, Chair, thank you to Councillor. I think in this particular case, we don't generally have that much detail recorded in the minutes. It is recorded, however. It has been committed to. It is taken as direction to staff, and you certainly have my commitment that those obligations will be met.
Thank you, Councillor Butters. We now go to the Corporate Services Committee. No? Oh, yes, we have to call the motion on the balances. All in favor? Opposed? Carried? Now Corporate Services Committee. I'm going to call on Councillor Foster for the motion.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. I have a resolution moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Whalen that report CSC 1-2019 being the open session minutes of the Corporate Services Committee meeting that was held on Wednesday, January the 9th, be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved. Thank you.
Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Greenwood.
CSD 7.1 and discuss that under the corporate services. This one.
7.1 to be pulled.
CSD 2, 2019.
Okay.
Okay. It's the report respecting the request to write off outstanding amounts of $25,000 or more that be received. I was just wondering, the write-offs, the uncollectible write-offs totaling $542,745, and who do they include? That's a lot of money that we're writing off.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. The write-offs are included for some of the lower municipalities in regards to the transportation plan funding. And then there's a write-off that goes back a number of years ago that has to do with the OLG funding of the police.
Is that fine, Councillor Greenwood? You have your answer? Thank you. Okay. Councillor Sendzik. I think I see Councillor Senzik's name on the screen.
I wasn't speaking to this one, Mr. Chair. I was just going to make a general comment. So,
okay, I'll call the question on this right now. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Sendzik.
Just in terms of the vacancy rebates, we heard a presentation from the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, and I just want to thank the Corporate Services Committee for undertaking the review of this and staff for the work that they've done over the past year. The City of St. Catharines had requested, I think along with a couple of other municipalities, to review the vacancy rebate program. Municipalities across Ontario have been reviewing this because when we talk about how do we address our revenue shortfalls in our communities, we don't have a lot of tools. And so one of the tools is the vacancy rebate program, where we have a lot of empty storefronts, empty lots in our communities, and the benefactors were the ones that were leaving it empty and getting the rebate back. There will be some pushback from the business community, those who own large tracts of land that are vacant that are no longer going to get the rebate as it scales down over 3 years. But for this council, when we talk about revenue opportunities and how do we try and stop going to the taxpayer year after year with an increase, these are the small moves that we can make. So it's an important decision that we're making today. It'll help lower tier municipalities. It'll help the region. There will be some frustration from large property owners that have vacant lots. But the reality is, my message to them is start developing. Don't leave the lot vacant. Start developing. And if you can't develop it, sell it. Thank you.
We're calling the question on the balance of it. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And now we move, I believe, to the Planning and Economic Development Committee minutes. I'm calling on Councillor Hewson for the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a resolution moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Yip that report PEDC 1-2019 being the open session minutes of the Planning and Economic Development Committee meeting held on Wednesday, January the 9th, 2019, be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved.
Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. The next is the Budget Review Committee of the Whole. And I'm going to call on Councillor Zalepa for the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a revelation. I have a resolution. Well, revelations tonight. I have a resolution moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Lucero, that report BRC. Thank you, there. BRCOTW 1/2019, being the open session minutes of the Budget Review Committee of the Whole meeting held on Thursday, January 10th, 2019, be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved. Thank you.
Anyone wish to speak? If not, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And next, the Chief Administrative Officer's report. Apparently, there's no CAO report. So we go to a further motion. I'm going to call on Councillor Greenwood for this motion regarding a procedural bylaw amendment. Moment for reflection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a revelation before me, a revelation. I shouldn't have listened to you. I have a resolution before me, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Witteveen. Whereas on May 21st, 2015, Regional Council amended Niagara Region's procedural bylaw number 120/2010 as amended to replace the invocation with a moment of silence. Whereas on September the 10th, 2015, Regional Council referred a motion to replace moment of silence and recitation to the Procedural Bylaw Review Committee for consideration. Whereas the Procedural Bylaw Review was not completed during the last term of Council. Whereas the reading of a secular statement would be a positive start to Regional Council meetings. Now therefore be it resolved that Section 11.1b of the Procedural Bylaw moment of silence be replaced with a moment of reflection, and that a councillor be provided a choice of 3 secular reflections to read at a council meeting during the moment of reflection.
Any speakers? If not, I will call a motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Next will be, are there any notices of motion? None. Then I'll move to, is there any other business limited to announcements? It says limited to announcements.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that this is where you would put the Bill 66 motion on the floor.
Okay.
So the reason why it's here today is because the commenting period closes, I believe, on January 20th or 22nd. I'll look at the Director of Planning. The comment period closes, so moving this to the Planning Committee for consideration moves us beyond the commenting period. There is still 2 other readings, so there is an opportunity for further engagement with the provincial government. And I think what has been put in front of you today is really in recognition of what is unique to Niagara, and that we are grateful to be in this place where, unlike other parts of the province, we do have 2 Great Lakes between us, the Niagara River, the escarpment, our agricultural lands, and everything that it provides for us. So we're very respectful of the Greenbelt, as well as the understanding for economic development and job creation. The motion itself is a starting point. I'm not saying that this is the motion that Council would necessarily be 100% in agreement of, but the reason why it's crafted this way is because it's important that we're making a comment on Bill 66 as a region. We may disagree with aspects of it, and that's why the commenting period is provided to us. But I think what's important that needs to be understood by the provincial government is that municipalities need to work with the provincial government to identify ways to streamline the planning and development approval process. Anyone in here who has talked to anyone who has developed large-scale projects in the region would understand that the multiple layers of regulation is really what's challenging many of the developments as they take place. It's not a matter of removing the regulations, but it's streamlining them. So when you talk to planners, when you talk to planners in other parts of the province as well, they will tell you that it's the regulatory framework that is really causing a lot of the problems. But we can't eliminate the critical environmental protections. So this is a balancing act. And I think what the provincial government has done today is said, we want to be open for business. And what the municipalities are saying, we agree with you, but you can't take away the watershed. You can't take away the greenbelt. You can't take away these important pieces of legislation that is really protecting our environmental space. So I'm trying to get to a point with this motion through the chair that allows us to comment in a meaningful way and allows the director of planning and the lower tier municipalities to comment in a meaningful way that does get to the core of the issue, which is regulatory frameworks are what we should be discussing. And we need to protect the greenbelt, we need to protect our water sources, and that needs to be a part of the discussion as well. So I'm open for modifications, but we need to get this done so that the province understands that Niagara has a voice at this table too.
Commissioner?
Through the chair, I just wanted to offer some introductory comments. I understand there's going to be speakers to this. Just to confirm the fact that under correspondence item 11.1 and 2, those are the staff comments with respect to providing some technical input through the EBR on Bill 66 and the open for business bylaw opportunity. All I wanted to say is that generally speaking, the Regional Planning Service as well as the Economic Development Service supports the intent around Bill 66. Having said that, our letter does reference a number of technical issues that we believe would provide a little bit more confidence and framework around the utilization of the bill. So having said that, I think we've captured the concerns in the context, within the context of Niagara. The one thing that I did want to clarify was there was quite a bit of discussion around safe water. Again, the jurisdictions that were identified, Waterloo, Guelph, and others, their water source are aquifers or the Grand River, which is significantly different than Niagara, where we obtain our water through Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And certainly if there's a major employment opportunity within the region, they would likely be connected to our municipal water and sewer system. So the risks associated with source protection, in my view, and perhaps the CAO can speak to it as well, are, in our view, is quite minimal and easily controlled. So I just wanted to sort of clarify that issue, and so I wouldn't want to belabor the point around safe water and potential source contamination in the Niagara context. And that's really it for my speaking points.
Thank you, Commissioner. We do need a seconder for the motion. Seconder for the motion, Councillor Bilsma. Discussion, and I've had Councillor Sanzik already, so I'll go to Councillor DeZero.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Bradley. I have a question actually for the Commissioner, if I can. You mentioned here that in your first point that it's unclear whether they'll be used for more than one proposed area. Is that per local municipality or per region? Like if we're looking at the Glendale area, for example, which I think some of it is in Greenbelt, would that preclude any other area within the region to then be dealt with?
Yeah, and thank you for the question, and through Chair Bradley. Again, a minor point, but we wanted to clarify how it can be utilized by a local municipality, whether it's restricted to one bylaw at a time, or whether it's there's the opportunity to utilize it as required. So we wanted just to clarify that point. It's a minor point, but we felt it's something that we didn't see when we read through the proposed legislation.
Okay, so for me, I like the way this motion is going. I'm wondering if the mover and seconder would allow two little changes. So in the middle of the therefore be it resolved paragraph, instead of and encourages, can we put however encourages? I want to sound a little more cautious than just great. And the other thing is without eliminating critical environmental protections and green belt, to add the green belt in there as well, if that's okay. I'm happy to support this. For me, as I said, the jury's still out a little bit. I'm not, and I agree with Mayor Redikoff that the province is basically saying, we will do a ministerial zoning order for you if you need to move it along quickly, but they already have the opportunity to do that. I remember calling the province saying, look, will you help us with a ministerial zoning order? Because there's a property here on the road to self-destruction. And the minister said, well, sorry, you've already got the tools to do that, to control that, to see what happens. So I'm not sure why this is the road they're taking to help us develop and create more jobs. Because he already has that authority and we already have the right to ask him to do that. But I'm hopeful. And I'm also hopeful that this will just be for industrial and commercial properties. Because, as I said, I mean, there's been a lot of talk out there. I think Councillor Bello said on the street. You hear it on the street. And people are saying, no, this is the thin edge of the wedge to let, a lot more residential come in, and it's going to be more urban sprawl, and all people are going to have to do is convince the minister to put in a ministerial zoning order to allow it without even having to go to the local municipalities at all. So that concerns me a little bit. And the other thing that worries me too is that this just may be a step to get rid of the appeal through LPAT. So if a municipal council then says, yeah, okay, we're going to put this development here, and runs to the minister to put in a minister's zoning order, you've now taken away everybody's right to go to the LPAT. And if the intention is to have that process happen, I think we need to be upfront about it. And I think the province needs to tell people, you know what, we know what's best, and if we decide that this is what you're going to have, we're not going to allow you any appeal. So while I'm hopeful that this is going to take us into a very positive place, the jury's still out for me at this point. So,
Were you requesting, Councillor DeZero, an alteration to the motion?
yes, I did, and I believe the mover and seconder have agreed to that.
We have agreement from the mover and seconder.
Yeah.
She would like the clerk would like the specifics of that.
Oh, sure. In the middle of the paragraph, it's got expand and create jobs, comma, however, instead of and. And then at the very end to, without eliminating the green belt and critical environmental protections. Greenbelt lands, maybe.
Okay. Commissioner?
Again, through you, Chair Bradley, just to provide a little bit of context, and again, I'm just commenting to provide additional insight. So, in my experience, obtaining a ministerial zoning order is exceedingly difficult. It's very rare. There's only been 2 occasions, to my knowledge, where it's been related to land use in Niagara. GE is, of course, the most recent, and not an easy thing to obtain. And I think the thrust of the bill is to provide a little bit more autonomy and perhaps to get the attention of the minister or the ministry actually to facilitate an open for business bylaw. So right now, the only way that a minister's zoning order is available is if you're able to convince the minister that it's a matter of provincial interest. Whereas now, with Bill 66, there'll likely be a framework that ministry staff, the bureaucracy, if you will be able to assess the request that comes forward from a local municipality and make a recommendation to the minister. So we see it as an opportunity to be a bit more expeditious, as well as it being more readily available as a tool to local municipalities. And I just provide that again for your edification.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Whitavine?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Mayor Sensic's comments on fast-tracking businesses that's in our community. Some of the larger businesses, that's their biggest complaint is just the length of time for process approval, multi-agencies, multi-comments. They've got their money ready. They're ready to invest it and make money. And also, you know, another comment, you know, protecting the green belt is one of the important things for agriculture here in Niagara, as we're since 2005 we've adapted to the environment and gotten used to the rules that surround it and allowed us to expand and grow here in Niagara. My only real concern is you know, what I heard today was the kind of the lack of public process in this bill. I'm a strong believer that the public should have participation in what their communities look like, and to maybe sometimes challenge how that business may function in their community. So that's, I guess, my biggest concern here today and in this resolution is we're really not, what I heard today was that people's concerns were having public process, and I'm not quite sure how to incorporate that into this resolution to reiterate the need for public process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Commissioner, you had a comment on that?
Just again, a little bit of clarification around that point. Where an open for business bylaw would differentiate from a zoning bylaw is that a zoning bylaw, there's a statutory requirement for a public meeting, as there is for the of a bylaw that adopts an official plan amendment. So an open for business bylaw does not have a statutory obligation for a public meeting, but there's nothing to say that the adoption of the bylaw, a local council cannot obtain public input. In fact, the adoption of the bylaw will have to be done in an open forum of council. I don't believe it would qualify as a matter for closed session, so it certainly would be a transparent instrument that the public would see. Yes, it would be up to the local council to determine how much public input is received around that adoption. And yes, there is no appeal period. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Councillor Rigby is next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think the first part of what I was interested in making sure was that the Greenbelt was included, but and also the Safe Water Act, I think, needs to be in there. We have parts of our community that rely on the aquifer, and they do have wells, and they do have septic systems, and up in Waynfleet, I know for sure it is, and so we need to be making sure that's in there because it may affect in those areas, and in fact, that aquifer flows down into Lake Ontario. Surprisingly, it's not going back as much into Lake Erie as people think. So I would encourage that added to where the Greenbelt is on the therefore be it resolved part of the motion. If I can ask the two motion movers and the seconder on that. The other is a question I think I have for planning. This action that's taken is being taken by the province of Ontario, but does that feed down direction to our own planning and our own local authorities that they are involved in making sure they are concentrating on that particular development, whatever it is? Because certainly in times we have spent a whole lot of time cross swords and don't get things done as quickly as we may like to have done. So does that do that? Does Bill 66 do that?
Commissioner?
Through you, Chair. I believe it does. As I said, an open for business bylaw is an instrument of the local council,
okay,
not an instrument of the regional council. Having said that, the local council, I believe, would have to have a high degree of consultation with the region with respect to a number of matters, including servicing, connections to water and sewer systems, road access permits. It doesn't negate the need for an environmental assessment, a certificate of approval, and other things that would facilitate the development. So the local municipality can impose conditions associated with the Open for Business bylaw. Some of those conditions could be regional conditions that we would like to see incorporated to protect the regional interest. But at the end of the day, it is intended to be a very streamlined process that would enable a planning authority, the local council, to act quickly to facilitate the location and development of a major employer.
So in the who does what area, it is clearly the provincial or the local municipality, and yet much of what they depend upon is what is supplied by the region. Should we not have or are we prevented from having a regulation related to when this is enacted that where we are involved, that we are committing more energy into that particular project?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, in my view, I would recommend that the instrument still be primarily a local council planning bylaw, if you will, because in our two-tier system, the local municipalities have authority for zoning and they have authority for land use. The region actually does not. We provide services, we provide oversight with respect to growth management. Occasionally, there are matters of regional interest, and what we typically do is request the local municipality to address those as conditions of development. So that's historically how it's worked. We see that through plans of subdivision. We see that through site plan agreements where we impose conditions. And I believe that would be the appropriate way to exert a regional interest on an Open for Business bylaw that a local municipality may be considering.
Because it's historical, I don't know that I don't understand why we wouldn't enact something that puts our staff, and us, are in that position where we need to act quickly on an issue. Out of the box thinking, you've got water lines going all over the region, of which we own many of them because they're supply lines, but it might be that we have to provide access to those water lines for whatever this project is. And so I think that's a matter that should be discussed, if I should suggest, at committee, and then perhaps we should be looking at something that we could improve on our own actions. Thank you.
Councillor Rigby, you had asked for an adjustment to the to this, so I'll ask you to put that forward now, the adjustment to the resolution motion before us.
Well, now therefore it be resolved. So where we have, without eliminating the Greenbelt lands and the Clean Water Act. Pardon? Source water. Well, it's the act that we're working under is a clean water protection. I think. Am I wrong?
Mover and seconder, okay with that? I heard a yes. Thank you, mover and seconder. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Rigby. We now go to Councillor Dart.
Commissioner Mustacci answered the question about the safe water issue. I'm done.
Thank you, Councillor Dart. Councillor Bilsma.
So before I was a little bit reticent to entertain a motion, but I find this motion to be balanced, and so therefore I seconded it. Just wanted to get that off as a starting comment. And I believe that there's always kind of a tension or a pendulum between business jobs and the environment and some of the things that we're concerned with that will always exist. But I do feel that for well more than a decade or maybe even longer, that the pendulum has been very, very restrictive in its position, and we've seen jobs squeezed out and difficulty attracting some of those bigger employers. I think we're creating a straw man by suggesting that that somehow the province is going to mandate that a particular municipality is going to take on a big employer. I think in the case of Welland, for example, Welland wanted to have a big employer come in, and GE was attracted, and we want to make that expeditious. That's what we're after. This is not something that any municipality would be opposed to. If it was, those initial discussions would suggest that to the company that we'll look elsewhere. What municipality like St. Catharines wouldn't want the Port Weller Dry Docks lands being utilized again as job creation, or the John Deere lands? Some municipalities don't have the benefits of tourism or agriculture to drive their local economies. And so we're talking about municipalities desiring to have large employer opportunities here and not losing them through a very comprehensive, important, but sometimes burdensome process, which may take 5 or longer years, and at the potential of losing those potential employments. And so this opportunity that the province is allowing us to access an expeditious route through all of the red tape. I don't think that they're suggesting for a moment that they're going to bypass, but you have someone assigned, or a body or a group of people assigned specifically to this account that would allow them to navigate the process with wisdom and understanding of how the process works in such a way that this can be expedited without, and I firmly believe that they're just going to, like, honestly, if I had to navigate some portion of my personal property that I wanted to build something, I wouldn't for a moment hesitate to ask Mr. Mustachi to give me a hand, because he knows the whole process and he could expedite it if it was legal. I'm just saying, because he knows the process, he's a very valuable resource if you needed planning understanding. And what the province is saying is they're going to get gentlemen who know the whole ins and outs of all the legislation and such, to make sure that as soon as something clears one desk, that immediately goes to the next desk, and there's no time lost. And that process, without eliminating all the intricacies of that, is cumbersome, because usually you're waiting for a secretary to pass it on. But if somebody's waiting to receive hot off the press the approval from one agency to the next, there's no transgression. It's just expediting the process. And I think that's ultimately what we're looking at. So instead of a 5-year process, a 1-year process. And so I think that this is a way to allow us to generate, to be able to act on an Amazon or on a steel company coming to our town, utilizing the infrastructure that they already find here, utilizing the labor that we have available to us, and being able to strike quickly. I think that this is going to give us an edge in a global market. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Furtick.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify a few things, and I agree with what Councillor Billsman and Councillor Sednick has said, in order to eliminate red tape, there's no question you want the GE to come into, to the Niagara region. Having said that, can the municipalities go directly to the minister and bypass the region? That's the feeling I get when I heard the presenters. Am I wrong, or am I right?
Commissioner, I would say in theory, through you, Chair, that might be possible. In reality, I don't see that ever happening, and I'm just being honest. Having worked with all the local municipalities, with the staff, understanding the seriousness that the local councils take their land use decision-making, I know that there would always be consultation with the region. The other reality is that these big operators who, and we have the acting director of economic development here, these big employment interests that come, often come through the region. You know, so we know who they are, and they seek support from the region. In addition to the land use approval, they come to us for incentives, for TIGs, for all sorts of things. So to think that the region will never be part of the conversation is unrealistic.
Okay, does this resolution cover, as an example, of making sure that the municipalities go through the region? It doesn't, right? Because, and the reason I say it doesn't, we're encouraging to go to consult with the municipalities, but that doesn't mean to say the municipality is going to agree to come to the region. I can just see something slipping through. That's all. I guess my other comment is that do you not think that the position that we're taking here is a position for the entire Niagara region without the consultation of the municipalities? Are we jumping the gun here? I don't know. I'm asking the question and throwing it out. Should we be going back to the municipality and asking their opinion to support us? Or should we just do it carte blanche and tell them?
Commissioner, any comments?
Chair, with respect, I don't believe that's a question that I can answer. We have the heads of council here who represent their local municipalities, and I would leave it up to them to maybe express to what extent they would like to receive a mandate from their local councils with respect to how the region should be responding to Bill 66.
Anything further, Councillor? If not, I will go to Councillor Butters.
Thank you, Chair Bradley. Actually, Councillor Rigby raised my concerns with source water protection and the vulnerable aquifer. So on behalf of my rural neighbors and myself, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Easton.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to speak on behalf of the other mayors in the room, but I will state through you to Councillor Furtick that it is not required for the regional council to provide the town of Lincoln with any kind of mandate on how we need to conduct ourselves with the planning department. Because as I spoke earlier, we have a proposition within our official plan that relates to how development is going to take place on agricultural land. And it was already approved by the public because it was through the official plan. And furthermore, we have letters of endorsement from both the Minister of Municipal Affairs of the day and the Minister of Agriculture. It is not advisable to behave like the Wild West in any set of circumstances, and we did not need a rule to tell us that we should sit down and speak to as many people as possible. That particular proposition, by the way, has advantaged us. In 2012, the value of our development was around 78 million. At the end of 2018, we turned at 200 million. We didn't get there by ourselves, and nor will we with this. But there are going to be times when, and we've talked about this, where we may decide in a very isolated case to say, just for an example, for the purpose of tourism, that we would want to go forward in the following way. Mr. Chairman, my concern isn't with Bill 66. My concern, quite honestly, is with municipalities beginning to wrestle with the fact that they do have an accountability to do tremendous proactive planning with their communities. We need to completely eliminate this business of, here's the plan, how do you like it so far? Well, mostly we don't like it, and we shouldn't. And we should have consulted very extensively with people in our community before those situations occur. It's not the way we've done business, I get it, but it really is not the right way. So dealing with applications piecemeal, when you really don't know how you want the urban design of an entire street to look, it really isn't advisable. And this does not concern me, because I know that we have had 4 years of experience for sure in my tenure. We've always talked with the region, not because they're big brother, it's just the way you do business. You know where the resources are, you know where the expertise is, you bring what you can to the table and you figure it out. It's been very successful. This does not worry me. It really doesn't. If it's not good for the community, we're not going to do it.
Thank you. We have no further speakers, so we have a motion before us that you see on your screens. We have had discussion on it. I will call the motion. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. And we're going to have something else come up on the screen right now. It's on its way. Okay. Any questions on the closed session? The items you see on your agenda? No questions? Okay, there's a motion on the screen. We need a mover and seconder. Councillor Butters has moved it, and the seconder is Councillor Greenwood. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Now we have the bylaws. I'll call on Councillor Bilsma for the motion on the bylaws, which you see before us.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Zalepa that bills 2019-03 inclusive to 2019-10 be now read and do pass.
Any speakers to this? If not, I will call the motion. All in favor? Sorry, there was a speaker. And that is Councillor Rigby.
I believe Bill 2019-06 is in this, which is am I correct within that motion? Just a question on that. This is related to authority and acquisition, purchasing, sorry. Right?
That's correct.
So I'm just reading it. Hold my finger. And the authority for 1 million to 5 million is the CAO and department director or commissioner. I call the commissioner. Purchasing and execution is the CAO for 1 million to 5. Now, we had a motion that was in public health tonight, which relates to a project that was estimated to be somewhere around 4 million. Now, is it the commissioner of public health that's now building the bridge, or is the commissioner of public works being authority, and who is going to, how is this working out? On the basis that this has been approved through public health, which is understandable, but it's still, who's doing it? Thank you.
CAO.
Through you, Chair. So the vehicle in which the actual investment was approved was through public health.
Okay.
It makes sense now that the project itself be coordinated through public works. I think to the question in terms of executing, so it would have to be done through the procurement bylaw and all the procedures that apply to that. The actual execution of a contract, assuming it's within budget, would be by the commissioner as well as the CAO.
Okay, now the acquisition of the single source, I gather we're doing a single source on the engineering or design because we're going back to the original design of the bridge. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, in the interest of time and in order to get things to a point where we had information to convey to council, under my direction, we went sole source to the original designers of the structure to do the conceptual design. And I think that is truly the only option because of the actual structural design considerations that are involved. We've committed to come back to council with details on that. It will likely, in terms of the value amount, that is within the discretion of the CAO spending authorization. But to be fair and appropriate and to council, that recommendation to complete the process would come back before council.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the design work is somewhat less than 4 million. So it would probably be well within the limit that you have. Am I correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you. I was, reading this particular item brought to mind is how did we single source? So we've met that criteria. And now we're going forward with a fulsome report on the end result.
That's correct.
I'm sorry to prolong this.
Oh, please.
When we come back with the report, this is going to be an estimate on the cost, which will then become the budget, and then we'll still go out for tender on that project, I would assume.
CAO.
Through you, Chair, respecting the resolution that was passed, the budget has been established through the conceptual design, and that'll be considered as part of the capital budget process. We will be coming back to council when that design is being finalized and prior to going out to a tender for its actual construction. And that was in and around the 3 to 4 month period as was indicated in the report, with also an update on activity at that location, that piece of infrastructure.
Would it be more appropriate if we shift this over to Public Works and then we can address that in Public Works Committee as to the ongoing process as we go forward on this project? Because my next question would be, okay, who's going to oversee the building of the structure as they go forward? Or do we then go out for tender for that as well, for procurement?
CAO.
Through you, Chair.
Sorry about this.
It could go, yes, Public Works will oversee the construction of what is to be built. In terms of the next report, I'll suggest it could go either to Public Health or Public Works, depending on what we're reporting, because there were a number of initiatives that were talked about in the report, and there was a commitment to bring updates back on those. But depending on what we have to report at that time, if it's more heavy weighted towards Public Works, it would likely get suited there. If it's more heavy weighted towards mental health in general, it'd be better suited there. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Any other speakers? Yes, Councillor Reddick.
If I might, Mr. Chair, just to follow up on Councillor Rigby's comments. So this $2.64 million, is that additional to the debt that we learned about last Thursday, or is this included already?
It's already included.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? If not, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. There being no further business, this meeting is, oh, hold on, Councillor Greenwood has.
Business. Niagara Falls has their Sports Wall of Fame on the 27th of January. We'd love to have you there. And do you want to collect these at the end of the meeting? Please? Okay, everyone? No? The confidential report?
Yes. Yes, we'll
'Cause,
collect
we
all the
don't need-
confidential reports we
Okay.
left. They'll be
Thank you.
collected. Anything else? Then the meeting is, Councillor Bitteveen. I don't think we need a motion. I think we just adjourn. Thank you very much anyway for that kind offer.
When is the application going out for your office? When is the call for application?
We're finalizing the position description for